The conference room was a glass cathedral built for spectacle. Every pane reflected Isla Ward's calm, rehearsed smile as if the building itself were holding its breath. Reporters lined the aisles, phones poised like weapons, flashes blinking in the hush before the storm. "Ms. Ward," someone called, "can you confirm the rumors that you were in a relationship with Dominic Hart?" She had known this question was coming. The morning briefing had carved it into her nerves until she could repeat the answer without a thought, but knowing didn't make it easier when the words had to cross her tongue. "No," she said, and her voice carried like glass breaking cleanly. "Mr. Hart and I maintain a strictly professional relationship." A ripple of sound swept through the room. Keyboards, the hiss of lenses zooming in, the low animal hum of curiosity being fed. Isla kept her expression neutral, the face of Hart Industries' immaculate PR director. Behind the front row of cameras sat Dominic Hart. He didn't blink, didn't move. His expression was pure empire, controlled, unreadable, unbothered. Only the smallest shift in his jaw betrayed anything at all. She felt it even through the glare of the lights, a phantom ache under her ribs. She forced herself to look past him, to the banner behind her that read integrity, innovation, Hart Industries. Words she had helped design, now branding the lie that would save them both. The moderator redirected questions toward quarterly earnings. Isla answered with crisp precision, pivoting the story away from scandal toward stock performance. Every statistic was a rope she threw across the canyon opening beneath her feet. By the time it ended, the reporters had what they wanted, a denial polished enough to print. The stock would rise by morning. Dominic's investors would sleep again. And Isla Ward would be a ghost. When the cameras cut, silence roared. She stepped off stage, her pulse drumming under her collar. Her assistant caught up, whispering, "You handled it perfectly. He's going to be thrilled." Isla managed a smile. "Let's hope the market agrees." In the mirrored hallway beyond the stage, she finally saw herself. Shoulders drawn tight, lipstick perfect, eyes hollow. Every inch of her screamed competence. No one would guess that the calm woman in heels had thrown up twice this morning, or that the secret inside her body had a heartbeat now. Dominic was waiting near the exit. His entourage stood a respectful distance away, pretending not to notice. He held a tablet in one hand, scanning headlines already updating in real time. Their eyes met. 1,000 memories surged, his hand tracing the inside of her wrist in quiet corridors, the way he spoke her name only when no one could hear. All of it vanished behind the mask he wore now. "Good work," he said. His voice was smooth, businesslike. "Thank you, Mr. Hart." The formality cut deeper than any accusation. She walked past him, the scent of his cologne brushing against her as if mocking everything she'd denied. In the car, the city blurred into silver light. She pressed her hand against her stomach without thinking. There was no visible curve yet, just a quiet knowledge that changed everything. She whispered to the glass, "You'll never know him the way I did." But she wasn't sure if she was talking to the child or to herself. Across town, Dominic watched the replay of the press conference alone in his office. The sound was off. He didn't need it. He knew every word she had said, could read the shape of each syllable on her lips. "She doesn't know him," the captions declared. He smiled once, the kind of smile people mistook for indifference. In truth, it was armor. He already knew about the appointment on her calendar, the one she'd tried to hide under consultation. He had seen the medical envelope in her purse when she thought he wasn't looking. Dominic Hart didn't flinch because there was nothing left to flinch from. He had built an empire by understanding the currency of secrets, and Isla's silence had just made her the most valuable secret of all. Night fell heavy over the city. Isla sat at her kitchen table surrounded by drafts of press releases. Every line she'd ever written for him was suddenly an echo of this moment, truth dressed in spin. Her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "You handled them well. Sleep. You'll need it. D. No threats. No accusations. Just certainty," as if he still owned the right to tell her what to do. She typed and deleted 3 replies before turning the phone face down. Outside, a siren wailed somewhere in the distance. Isla pressed her palms together and whispered the kind of prayer that wasn't about forgiveness but survival. She told the world she didn't know him. Tomorrow she would have to live like it was true.
The lights of the conference hall still burned behind his eyes long after the cameras stopped flashing. Dominic Hart stood at the edge of the stage, the hum of voices fading into a kind of sterile quiet. Around him, his people moved in neat lines, assistants gathering tablets, advisors murmuring about market reaction, security watching the exits. It was the same choreography that followed every public event, yet tonight it felt like watching strangers perform a ritual for someone else's life. He glanced once toward the hallway Isla had taken. Gone. The air she'd occupied still held the trace of her perfume, faint citrus over steel. "Mr. Hart, the initial data's positive," said one of the communications directors. "The denial's everywhere. Markets are stabilizing." He nodded. "Good. Keep monitoring sentiment. I'll release a statement in the morning." A pause. They waited for more instruction. When none came, they scattered, grateful for his brevity. Dominic's stillness was its own kind of language. The people who worked for him had learned it well. To them, he was simply calculating, already planning the next move. They couldn't see the fault line running under the comm surface, the place where her voice had cracked something that couldn't be fixed with strategy. He returned to his car alone. The driver opened the door, but Dominic waved him off. "I'll drive." The city blurred past the tinted glass, neon smears and cold reflections. He didn't need directions. His body knew the route to the tower better than muscle memory. The silence inside the car was dense, broken only by the rhythmic click of the turn signal as he waited at red lights. He replayed the moment she'd said it. I don't know him beyond work. A lie precise enough to be flawless. He almost admired it. The tone, the posture, the stillness of her hands. Every part of her had been trained for that single sentence. But what struck him wasn't the lie itself, it was the courage it took to tell it. He'd watched her freeze entire rooms with calm before, but never like this. This time, she had burned herself to keep his empire standing. Dominic tightened his grip on the steering wheel until the leather creaked. It would have been easier if she'd cried, or if she'd looked at him when she said it. But she'd kept her gaze on the reporters, as if he didn't exist. He parked beneath the tower and rode the private elevator up. Floor after floor of glass and light passed in silence. When the doors opened, the penthouse office was dark except for the city's pulse below. Screens glowed across the far wall, updating in real time, stock prices climbing, headlines turning from scandal to success. Hart Industries reaffirms integrity. PR director denies rumors. He poured a glass of water, not whiskey. He hadn't had alcohol in years. Control required clarity. But clarity tonight was a double-edged blade. His phone buzzed on the desk, a message from an analyst. "Excellent optics. You owe Isla Ward a bonus." A bitter smile touched his mouth. A bonus, as if loyalty could be priced. He set the phone face down and opened the secure folder on his tablet. Inside were the details his private security had gathered, the pattern of her recent searches, a doctor's appointment under her insurance, an unexplained week of sick leave. Nothing definitive, yet enough to paint a shape he could already recognize. He'd known before the denial. He'd known the night she disappeared from the gala early, her face too pale under the gold lights. The same night she'd told him she needed space. He had respected it then. Now he understood what space meant. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked down at the river cutting through the city. It glimmered like a blade. In the reflection, he barely recognized himself. A man made of angles and restraint, a ghost wrapped in tailored wool. He thought of the last time he'd touched her. Not in detail, just the quiet after. The way she'd rested her head on his chest, her heartbeat syncing with his until he believed silence could be safe. He had built his entire empire on predictability, on the illusion that emotion could be contained. And then Isla had walked into his life and proven him wrong simply by existing. Now she was protecting him by pretending he meant nothing. And somewhere inside her, something of him still lived. Dominic pressed a hand to the glass, not to steady himself, but to remind his body what control felt like. Hours passed. Reports continued to update. The crisis, from a corporate standpoint, was over. Yet he couldn't stop watching the playback of the conference. Her posture, her voice, the precision of each answer. He caught the smallest flicker, barely a breath, when a reporter had asked about personal involvement. A heartbeat's hesitation before she said no. It wasn't guilt. It was pain. And pain, he knew, was more reliable than truth. By midnight, the office had emptied. The only sound was the faint hum of the servers. Dominic sat on the edge of his desk, elbows on his knees, eyes half closed. He could call her. She wouldn't answer. He could send someone. She'd see it as punishment. There was nothing to be done tonight except wait. He opened his laptop, composed a message that said only, "You handled them well. Sleep. You'll need it. D." It was both warning and care, the only language he could offer without breaking his own rules. When he finally left the office, the city was asleep. The lobby guard pretended not to notice him, a courtesy Dominic appreciated. Outside, the air smelled like rain. He walked to his car slowly, hands in his coat pockets. The first drops began to fall, blurring the reflections of streetlights on the pavement. He didn't use the wipers at first. The distortion suited his mood. The world looked softer when nothing was in focus. He wondered if she'd eaten, if she'd slept, whether she'd put a hand over her stomach the way she always did when she was thinking too hard. The details he remembered were dangerous. They built a bridge between logic and something far less manageable. The car idled outside her building before he realized where he was. No lights in her apartment. Curtains drawn. He didn't go in. He wasn't ready to face her, and she wasn't ready to forgive him for being the man she had to lie for. He sat there until the rain became a steady percussion against the windshield. Then he drove away, leaving no trace except the faint warmth of headlights on brick. Back in the penthouse, he found himself standing at the same window again, watching the first pale hint of dawn over the river. The city would wake soon, praising Isla Ward for saving Hart Industries. She would wear her composure like armor, and he would play the role of the unshaken CEO. But beneath the glass and headlines, a new equation had begun, one that couldn't be calculated on a balance sheet. Dominic had built his success on anticipating every outcome, on understanding leverage before anyone else saw it. Now he faced a situation where leverage meant nothing. He wasn't angry at her. Anger was clean, and this wasn't. This was something slower, deeper, threaded with reluctant admiration. She had risked everything to protect him, and in doing so had forced him to confront what he'd never planned for. The possibility that his heart wasn't entirely his own. He pressed his thumb against the cool glass until a faint print bloomed there. Outside, the city's pulse quickened. He didn't blink. He wouldn't, because he already knew what grew in silence, and he intended to protect it, whether she let him or not.
The first 24 hours after a public lie are the most dangerous. Isla Ward knew that rule better than anyone alive. It was printed between the lines of every crisis manual she'd ever written, tucked behind every speech she'd ever rehearsed for someone else. The lie doesn't end when the words leave your mouth. It begins there. And if you don't control it, it will start to control you. She sat alone in the glass-walled communications floor of Hart Industries at 6 a.m, surrounded by screens glowing with the proof of her own precision. Every headline carried the same melody. PR director denies affair rumors. Hart Industries stabilizes after turbulent week. The market graph on the central display curved upward again, a clean heartbeat rising after cardiac arrest. She should have felt relief. She should have smiled. Instead, she felt hollow, an echo walking through the aftermath of her own performance. The coffee in her hand had gone cold. She hadn't slept. She'd rewritten the same line of a press memo 6 times because her brain couldn't decide if confidence sounded too much like cover-up. She turned her phone face down to stop the vibration of constant notifications. Investors praising her, journalists requesting follow-ups, even friends texting half-joking congratulations. "You're trending again, Queen of Spin." They didn't know that her hands were still shaking. Across the office, dawn climbed the skyline, flooding the glass with slow gold. The city looked clean from up here, like it hadn't devoured her the night before. She told herself she did the right thing, the only thing. If she had confirmed anything between her and Dominic, the story would have detonated. Board members would have called emergency sessions. Competitors would have weaponized it. And Dominic's entire empire, the empire she'd helped him build word by word, headline by headline, would have bled in public. So she'd killed the rumor the only way she could, by killing herself in it. "I don't know him beyond work." The words still tasted like metal. A knock sounded on the glass wall. Her assistant, Maya, stood outside holding 2 coffees and a tablet. "You've been here all night, haven't you?" Maya's tone was soft but edged with worry. Isla managed a faint smile. "Someone has to make sure the world keeps believing me." Maya stepped inside and set the fresh cup beside her. "Dominic's office called. He wants an updated talking points brief for the investor call." Of course he does. Isla reached for her keyboard. Send me the transcript from the financial desk. Maya hesitated. He also said you should take a few hours off. The keys stopped clicking. Isla looked up slowly. He said that? His assistant did. Direct quote was, Miss Ward should rest. For a moment, Isla's pulse faltered. She could picture him saying it, cool, factual, as if rest were an order, not concern. She swallowed. Thank you, Maya. I'll finish this first. When her assistant left, Isla leaned back in her chair and stared at the skyline again. So he was watching. Of course he was. Dominic Hart didn't let anything unfold outside his line of sight. He'd probably already analyzed every outcome, decided how far she'd go before breaking. He always knew how far she'd go. She wondered if he knew about the baby yet. Her hand drifted unconsciously toward her abdomen, but she stopped herself. Not here. Not under glass, where anyone could see. Not when the life she carried felt too fragile to survive the light. By mid-morning, the office filled with motion, the rhythm of keyboards, voices, laughter. She moved through it like an automaton, reviewing statements, clearing headlines, adjusting phrasing. Each line she crafted was a new thread in the web of control. She wrote sentences like walls. Polished, elegant, impossible to climb. Her entire career had been built on that gift, the ability to make the world believe what it needed to, even when the truth was collapsing quietly underneath. Now, she was the story she had to bury. Just after noon, her phone buzzed with a new message. Dominic Hart. Board meeting moved to 1:30. Be present. Conference room A. No greeting. No thank you. Just the command. She smoothed her hair in the mirrored elevator, her reflection composed but pale. Every second she climbed closer to the executive floor, her heartbeat thudded harder. She hadn't seen him since the press conference. The doors opened onto the polished silence of the top level. His assistant greeted her with a polite nod and led her through the maze of glass offices. Dominic stood at the head of the boardroom table, sleeves rolled, jacket off, posture carved from discipline. Around him, half a dozen board members scrolled through digital reports. He looked up when she entered. His expression didn't change. Miss Ward, he said evenly. Join us. Her title, not her name. She took her seat at the far end of the table, forcing her focus onto the presentation slide glowing on the wall. Crisis recovery, post-denial media sentiment, her own work staring back at her. Miss Ward, one of the older directors said, you've done exceptional damage control. The narrative's turned in our favor. Thank you, she said, voice steady. It was a team effort. Dominic's gaze didn't move from the screen. What's our next step? Consistency. Isla answered before anyone else could. We keep all communication aligned. The denial only holds if we maintain the same tone across every outlet. I'll personally review all external statements. Good, he said, no trace of warmth. Continue, she continued, walking them through projections and contingencies. The meeting lasted 40 minutes, every word careful, professional, distant. When it ended, the directors left quickly, murmuring praise. The door closed behind them, and silence filled the space. Dominic didn't move. Neither did she. He finally said, You've rebuilt the market faster than I expected. I learned from the best. The corner of his mouth twitched. Not a smile, but something near it. And yet you didn't learn how to trust me. She met his eyes then, the first time since yesterday. I trusted you enough to protect you. I didn't need protection. His tone sharpened. I needed the truth. The truth would have destroyed you, she said quietly. Then you should have let it. His words hit harder than any accusation. She took a breath, steady, refusing to let him see her flinch. Is that what you tell yourself? She asked. That it's better to burn everything down than admit to being human? Dominic's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. She gathered her tablet, ready to leave. If we're finished, we're not. He took a step closer, stopping just short of invading her space. His voice dropped lower, quieter. You've lied for me once. Don't make the mistake of thinking you can lie to me again. Her throat tightened. He knew. Not everything, maybe, but enough. She could feel the weight of his perception like a hand at her back. He had always seen through people, through her. I'm not lying, she said, too softly. He studied her for a long moment, the kind of silence that stripped a person down to truth. Then he said simply, You're pale. Go home. She blinked, caught off guard. I have work. I'll have Maya cover it. Go home, Isla. Her name at last, a command dressed as care. She wanted to say no. She wanted to tell him he didn't get to order her anymore, but the exhaustion in her bones betrayed her defiance. She turned without another word and walked out before her voice could break. By the time she reached her apartment, rain had begun to fall, steady and cold. She set her bag down, peeled off her heels, and stood in the dim quiet of her living room. The city outside shimmered behind wet glass. She should have felt safe here, but even her apartment felt like part of his empire. He had found the place for her when she'd first joined his inner circle, insisting on security and location. Everything around her still whispered his influence. Her reflection in the window looked like someone she didn't recognize. She pressed her palm to the glass, the same way he had the night before. Two ghosts mirroring each other across a city, neither of them could escape. For the first time, tears burned behind her eyes. Not from fear, not even from guilt, just exhaustion. The kind that comes from living two lives too long. She whispered into the dark, "You don't get to own me anymore." But the silence that followed didn't believe her. Hours later, her phone buzzed on the counter. A new message. "Dominic Hart, I sent security to your building. Don't fight them. It's precaution, not punishment." She stared at the text until the words blurred. It was so like him, to cloak control as protection, to make dominance sound like care. And yet a small part of her exhaled. Maybe because she was tired. Maybe because being guarded by him, even indirectly, still made her feel safer than anyone else ever had. She turned off the lights and let the city's glow fill the room. Her hand found her stomach again. The faintest smile ghosted across her lips, half defiance, half love. Whatever came next, she would protect this child, the way she'd once protected his empire. Ruthlessly, completely, without regret. Outside, rain traced silver lines down the window, like the world rewriting itself.
Power wasn't in speaking first. It was in waiting long enough for silence to do the work for you. Dominic Hart understood that principle better than most men understood breathing. It was why his board feared him, why entire markets paused when he raised a hand, why one woman's denial could feel like the beginning of an empire's next chapter, or its slow, inevitable fall. He waited. The penthouse office was dark when he entered. He didn't turn on the lights. He didn't need them. The city burned below, 1,000 windows glittering like distant embers. He could see his reflection in the glass, faint and ghostly, a man still in control, at least by appearance. But inside, something moved that control off balance. Isla Ward. Her name was a pulse behind his thoughts, sharp and steady. She was out there somewhere, thinking she'd drawn a clean line between them with one televised sentence. "I don't know him beyond work." He replayed it again in his mind, not because he doubted her delivery, but because he was fascinated by the precision of it. Isla had always been surgical with her words. She could amputate emotion from truth and still make it sound like conviction. He admired that. He hated that. He missed it more than he was willing to admit. Dominic moved through the apartment with the deliberate quiet of a man stalking his own ghosts. He shed his jacket, loosened his tie, poured himself a glass of water. The condensation slid down the glass, tracing a path over his fingers. He didn't drink it. He sat instead, elbows on his knees, watching the skyline like it might offer an answer. Every light in that city was connected to him in some way. He owned pieces of buildings, companies, futures. His reach extended through contracts, signatures, and silence. But he couldn't control her. He'd tried once, to define boundaries, to keep their relationship compartmentalized, clean. Isla had been the one person who didn't fit inside any of his boxes. She challenged him not through defiance, but through calm certainty. It had been infuriating, addictive, necessary, and now she'd cut him out to save him. He should have been grateful. Instead, he was furious, because gratitude was a weakness he couldn't afford, and fury was at least useful. By 9 o'clock, he'd reviewed 3 merger reports and none of them had registered. His phone buzzed twice, updates from his head of security. Isla had left the office, returned home, no unusual movements detected. Good. Predictable. He told himself that predictability was what he wanted. The lie didn't hold. By 10, he was in his car. The city at night was a living organism. Neon veins, metallic breath, the constant hum of traffic pulsing through it like blood. His driver looked surprised when Dominic slid into the front seat instead of the back. "Sir, I'll take it from here." The man hesitated. "Do you need? Go home." Dominic didn't wait for a response. He started the car himself, the low growl of the engine filling the silence like a restrained threat. The roads were half empty. Rain slicked the asphalt, reflecting the lights like mercury. He drove without thinking, navigating from muscle memory until the car rolled to a stop in front of her building. He killed the engine and sat in the dark, fingers tapping the steering wheel once, twice. The elevator in the lobby beyond the glass doors blinked up and down. Ordinary lives moved inside the lit windows, shadows cooking dinner, arguing, existing. He'd once imagined a life like that with her. Not in detail, he wasn't built for daydreams, but in flashes. Isla laughing over burnt toast. Isla barefoot in the morning light. The images were unbearable now. He got out and went inside. The doorman froze when he saw him, recognition flickering in his eyes. "Mr. Hart, don't announce me." The man nodded quickly, pretending to busy himself with a clipboard as Dominic crossed the marble lobby and pressed the elevator button. The ride up was silent except for the soft mechanical hum. Each floor passed like a held breath. When the doors opened, her hallway was dark. He knew the code to her door. She'd never changed it. The memory of her voice giving it to him, low and teasing, ghosted through his mind. "You don't get to own everything, Dominic." And yet she had given him the numbers anyway. He entered quietly. The apartment smelled like rain and sleep. Dim light from the street spilled through the curtains, painting silver lines across the floor. She was in the living room, curled on the couch in an oversized sweater, laptop open beside her. She'd fallen asleep sitting up, hand resting over her abdomen like instinct. He froze. It wasn't just protectiveness he felt. It was something deeper, older, primal. The faint rise and fall of her breathing made something in his chest unclench, even as his jaw hardened. He crossed the room silently and stood over her. For a moment, he did nothing, just watched. He thought about how easily she'd lied, how perfectly she'd buried what they'd been. He wondered if she regretted it, or if she was relieved. Then she stirred. "Dominic." Her voice was groggy, half-dreaming. He didn't answer. Her eyes opened slowly. Confusion flickered, then realization. She sat up too quickly, pulling her sweater tighter. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same," he said quietly. "But I already know." She blinked. "You shouldn't be here." "And yet I am." The words landed heavy in the air. For a moment, neither spoke. The only sound was rain against the window. She drew a slow breath. "If this is about yesterday—" "It is," he interrupted. "But not in the way you think." He stepped closer, into the edge of lamplight. His face looked sharper in the half-dark, all lines and shadow. "You lied to protect me. I understand that. What I don't understand is why you thought I needed protection from you." Her throat moved, but she said nothing. "Tell me why, Isla." His voice softened. "Why that way? Why those words?" She looked at him then. Not the CEO, not the man who owned half the skyline, but the one who used to sit on her kitchen counter while she worked, listening in silence, pretending not to be fascinated by her mind. She said quietly, "Because it was the only way to save you." "From what?" "From them. From the board, the investors, the vultures who were waiting for a reason to rip you apart." Her hands shook, but her tone didn't. "They said they'd leak more. That if I didn't deny it, they'd use me to take you down. You know what this world does to men who look like they've lost control." He was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "And what about you? Who protects you?" "I don't need protecting." "Yes," he said. "You do." She laughed softly, bitterly. "You mean I need controlling. I mean you need someone who won't let you destroy yourself out of loyalty." She turned away, staring at the rain outside. "It's done. The world believes the lie. You're safe." He took one step closer. The distance between them thinned like air before lightning. "Safe," he repeated. "You think I care about safety?" Her eyes flicked back to him. "You should." "I care about the truth," he said. "And the truth doesn't disappear because a few reporters printed your denial." Her lips parted, but before she could answer, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, her medical appointment confirmation. He set it gently on the table between them. She went pale. "Dominic, I'm not angry," he said quietly. "I just need to hear it from you." She looked at the paper, then at him. The air between them thickened. Finally, she whispered, "Yes." He exhaled through his nose, slow and controlled. He'd known, of course, but hearing it stripped something raw inside him. "How far?" he asked. 8 weeks. He nodded once, expression unreadable. "That explains the fainting spell last week." Her laugh broke on a sob. "So you had me followed." "I had you protected," he corrected. There's a difference. No, she said, shaking her head. There isn't. They stood there, two people bound by a secret that neither could survive alone. He moved first, turning toward the door. I won't tell anyone. Dominic. He stopped but didn't look back. Sleep. You'll need it. Her voice trembled. What are you going to do? He paused. The city's light framed him in the doorway, a figure half in shadow. Whatever it takes to make sure no one ever uses you, or our child, as leverage again. And then he was gone. Back in his car, the storm had eased. The streets shimmered with reflected light. Dominic sat in silence, hands on the wheel, pulse steady again. He wasn't a man who believed in fate. But for the first time, he understood inevitability. He'd built his empire to withstand anything, scandal, betrayal, loss. But this wasn't a negotiation. This was personal. And Dominic Hart never lost what was his. He would protect them both, even if it meant burning the world he'd built to the ground.
The rain hadn't stopped since he left. It drummed against the windows through the night, steady and relentless, as if the city itself was trying to wash away the sound of his voice still echoing in her apartment. 8 weeks, 2 months of secrets wrapped in silence. And now he knew. Isla sat on the couch where he'd stood, the medical paper he'd left behind still on the table, the one she hadn't had the courage to throw away. The ink bled slightly where her tears had touched it. Dominic always did things precisely. Even his confrontation had been clean. No shouting, no chaos, just surgical calm. I'm not angry, I just need to hear it from you. He hadn't needed to ask, not really. He'd already known. That was the part that terrified her most, that he could dismantle her privacy without even meaning to. She'd spent the last 5 years learning how to control the narrative of everyone else's lives. But she'd never figured out how to control her own. By morning, the storm had softened into a steady drizzle. The city outside her window looked like a memory, blurred, half real. Isla wrapped her arms around herself and tried to breathe. Her phone vibrated once on the counter, a message from Dominic's office, not from him directly. Hart Industries internal memo, strategic communications team meeting, 10 a.m. Her stomach twisted. She couldn't face him, not today. Not when her body still hummed with the echo of his presence. Not when her mind kept replaying the way he'd said our child with such terrifying certainty. She typed a quick response to her assistant. Working remotely today. Then she shut the phone off. The doctor's office smelled like antiseptic and lavender. Soft music played from hidden speakers, a sound too gentle for the chaos inside her chest. She sat in the dim light, one hand flat against the table, staring at the screen that waited to show her everything. The nurse smiled kindly. You'll hear the heartbeat today. The words landed like a promise and a threat all at once. Isla nodded, unable to trust her voice. When the image flickered onto the screen, something small, pulsing, impossibly alive appeared. The sound came next, faint, rhythmic, like the soft beating of wings. A heartbeat. Her own breath caught. The noise filled the room, filling every empty space inside her. She felt something she hadn't felt in months. Peace. Fragile but real. It wasn't about Dominic now. It wasn't about the scandal or the lies or the empire she'd betrayed to save. It was about this steady rhythm that existed because she'd chosen to stay alive when everything else demanded she disappear. Tears blurred the image. She tried to blink them away, but the nurse handed her a tissue. It's a strong one, the woman said softly. You're doing fine. Fine. A strange word, too simple for something that felt like being reborn and undone at the same time. When it was over, Isla sat alone in the small room, the faint echo of the heartbeat still in her ears. She pressed her hand against her abdomen, whispering, "It's just us now." By the time she left the clinic, her decision had solidified. She couldn't stay. Dominic would protect her. Yes, he'd protect the child too. But his version of protection came with walls built of power and control, where she'd become a piece of his strategy instead of a person. She'd seen the way he operated. If she stayed, he'd fold her into his empire, make her safety a project, her pregnancy a negotiation, her future another Hart enterprise to manage. And one day, their child would become another extension of his legacy. She couldn't let that happen. She had to leave before he decided what was best for them. Back at her apartment, she began to pack. She didn't take much, just what could fit in a single suitcase. Clothes, the folder of medical records, the small framed photo of her parents from the day she'd graduated college. Everything else, the furniture, the designer clothes he'd gifted, the luxury that came with being near him, stayed behind. None of it felt like hers anymore. Every few minutes she'd glance at the door, half expecting the sound of his key in the lock. He still had access. She hadn't changed the code. Maybe she wanted him to stop her. But the door stayed silent. At one point, her phone buzzed with another message. Dominic Hart, we need to talk. Dinner tonight, 7 p.m. I'll send the car. She stared at the words until they blurred, then typed back slowly. I can't tonight. I need space. The reply came instantly. Dominic Hart. Space is a luxury you can't afford right now, Isla. Her hand trembled. He wasn't threatening her, not directly. But the tone was familiar, the one he used in meetings when he'd already decided how things would end. She closed the phone and powered it off again. Space wasn't a luxury. It was survival. That evening, she stood by the window as the sun set, the sky bleeding into shades of gold and gray. The city looked peaceful from up here. No cameras, no boardrooms, no lies. She pressed her hand to the glass and whispered, You'll never know the world the way I did. It wasn't a promise. It was a vow. She didn't hear the footsteps until they were close. Her pulse spiked. For a split second, she thought it was him. But when she turned, it was her assistant, Maya, standing in the doorway with wide, anxious eyes. Ayla, I'm so sorry. He sent me. I tried to tell him you weren't answering calls. Maya, Isla's voice came out sharp. You can't be here. I know, but he's worried. He said you weren't well. Ayla took a breath. Tell him I'm fine. Maya hesitated. You're not fine. You look like you haven't slept in days. I don't need to sleep. I need to disappear. That silenced her. Ayla softened her tone. You've been a good friend. But if you care about me, don't tell him where I'm going. Maya looked torn. He'll find you. You know that, right? Isla smiled faintly, a shadow of irony. He's the best at finding things, but even Dominic Hart can't find what doesn't want to be found. Maya nodded slowly. Do you need help? Just this, Isla said, handing her a sealed envelope. If he comes looking, give him this. Not before. What is it? Closure, Isla said, or the closest thing to it. When Maya left, the apartment felt smaller, quieter. The last light of day vanished behind the skyline. Isla zipped her suitcase and set it by the door. She took one last look around, the apartment he'd chosen, the space they'd once filled with unspoken promises. She touched the edge of the kitchen counter where he used to lean while she cooked, the back of the couch where his jacket had once hung. Every object felt haunted. Her taxi arrived at midnight. She didn't leave through the main entrance. Instead, she slipped down the service stairwell and out a side door into the wet air of the alley. The suitcase wheels clattered softly over the pavement. When she looked up, the city stretched endless and indifferent above her. For the first time in months, she felt invisible. Freedom didn't feel like triumph, it felt like silence. She climbed into the cab and whispered to the driver, "Airport, please." The man nodded without question. The city began to blur past the rain-streaked window again, only this time, it wasn't a cage she was driving through, it was distance. She didn't know where she'd go yet. Somewhere small. Somewhere without headlines. Somewhere her child could be more than a secret. As the cab merged onto the freeway, she looked back once. Far in the distance, the Hart Tower gleamed like a blade cutting through the night sky. Somewhere inside, he was probably pacing, calculating, already realizing she was gone. She rested her hand against her stomach and whispered, "He'll try to find us." The faint hum of the engine filled the silence, steady as a heartbeat. She smiled through tears. Let him try.
Rain still slicked the streets when Dominic Hart walked into the morning. He hadn't slept. He rarely did when silence was louder than reason. His penthouse overlooked the city like a throne room made of glass. From here, he could see everything, the pulse of commerce, the rhythm of his empire, the reflection of power shaped by his name. But this morning, all he saw was absence. Her apartment window. Dark. No movement. No light. No Isla. He'd sent a message the night before. No reply. Then another. And another. When silence answered each one, he'd known. She was gone. Dominic didn't panic. Panic was for men who hadn't built fortresses from their own will. But beneath the controlled surface, something cracked. Not rage. Not yet. But something colder. The recognition of betrayal disguised as self-preservation. He could respect the logic. He couldn't forgive the method. He turned from the window as his phone buzzed. His assistant's voice came through, taut with caution. "Sir, the board is assembling early. They want clarification about yesterday's reports. Tell them I'll be there in 10. He ended the call and glanced once more at the skyline. Somewhere out there, Isla was probably watching the same dawn. He wondered if she thought he'd let her vanish quietly. He smiled to himself, a small, controlled curve of lips that never reached his eyes. She'd forgotten who she was running from. The boardroom smelled of old money and sharper motives. 12 directors sat around the obsidian table, their reflections warped across its polished surface. Screens glowed behind them with charts, numbers, the daily health of an empire they believed they controlled. Dominic entered without a word. Silence followed him, thick and expectant. He removed his jacket, laid it neatly across the back of his chair, and "Saturday, gentlemen. Let's begin." Charles Avery, the CFO, a man with the perpetual smugness of inherited wealth, cleared his throat. "Mr. Hart, we've reviewed the market data since the press conference. While the numbers are positive, there's concern about perception." "Perception," Dominic repeated mildly. "A fascinating thing, isn't it? The art of seeing what one wants instead of what's real." Charles hesitated. "The issue is Isla Ward. Her disappearance." "She hasn't disappeared," Dominic interrupted. "She's on leave." "Unannounced leave," another director said. "Unapproved, technically." Dominic leaned back, folding his hands. "Technically, I approve what I choose to approve." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the room, quickly dying when they saw his expression. Charles tried again. "The optics are delicate. After her denial, the sudden absence raises questions. Investors are calling. Some suspect she was forced out." Dominic smiled faintly. "Let them suspect. Suspicion keeps people predictable. They talk more when they think they're close to the truth." One of the older board members, Bennett, tapped his pen. "Dominic, this isn't a game. If the media senses instability in your inner circle, then I'll show them stability," Dominic said, voice like glass sliding into place. "You forget, I built this company on chaos. I know how to turn scandal into strategy." He tapped the table once, and the screen behind him changed. Graphs turned to acquisition data. A new name appeared, Brightline Communications. Charles frowned. "A media firm?" "Precisely." He rose, pacing slowly along the table's edge. "We control the narrative by owning the storytellers. I've acquired majority shares under a subsidiary name. By next week, every major outlet that shapes financial opinion will depend on our contracts." A murmur spread. Shock. Admiration. Fear. Dominic continued, calm as ever. "Hart Industries doesn't chase headlines. We write them." When he finished, silence fell again, the kind that followed revelation or defeat. Then, Bennett nodded slowly. "You've done it again, Hart." Dominic gave a short, humorless smile. "I always do." The meeting dissolved into cautious approval, questions about logistics, forecasts, and market strategy. He answered everything with precision, never faltering, never letting them glimpse the storm under his composure. By the time they adjourned, the boardroom buzzed with controlled awe. Dominic had, once again, turned potential scandal into power. The headlines would shift by morning. Hart expands media empire, PR strategy reimagined. Exactly as planned. When the last door closed, Dominic stood alone, staring at the empty chairs. He could still hear the faint echo of Isla's voice in his mind. "You don't get to own me anymore." He smiled again, this time softer. "You don't understand, Isla. I don't own you. I protect what's mine." He checked his watch, then made a call. "Status," he said when the line picked up. His head of security responded. "We've tracked the cab to the airport. Passenger left her phone behind, purchased ticket in cash. Destination? Unknown. The ticket was bought through a travel broker. But we're checking manifests." Dominic exhaled slowly. "She's scared. She'll hide somewhere quiet, somewhere that doesn't ask questions. Find her." "Yes, sir." He ended the call. For a long moment, he stood motionless, hands braced on the back of a chair, jaw tight. Every instinct in him screamed to go after her himself. But that wasn't who he was anymore. His moves had to be deliberate, unseen. The hunter didn't chase. He let the prey reveal its path. Still, the image of her sitting alone, hand over her stomach, haunted him. The secret she carried wasn't just his to protect now. It was his responsibility. That evening, Dominic went to the one place in the city that still felt untouched by the world, the private greenhouse atop the Hart Tower. Isla had designed it years ago, convincing him that even the ruthless needed something alive to keep them human. He stepped into the warm, damp air and loosened his tie. The scent of earth and rainwater filled his lungs. Rows of plants glowed under soft light, each leaf heavy with dew. She'd once said this was her sanctuary, the only place that didn't demand anything from her. He'd never understood it until now. He moved through the greenery until he reached the center, where her favorite chair still sat beneath the skylight. A cup still rested on the small table beside it, the faint stain of her lipstick untouched. He sat. For the first time in weeks, he let silence surround him without resistance. He thought about the press conference, the lie, the way her voice hadn't wavered. About the ultrasound appointment she hadn't told him about, the heartbeat he hadn't heard. And beneath it all, the same question that had kept him awake since she left. Why didn't she trust him to choose her over everything else? The answer came quietly. Because she didn't believe anyone could love her without turning her into a secret. And she was right. He'd made her one. Dominic closed his eyes and let the weight of it settle. The cost of power had always been isolation, but he'd never realized what it would mean to face it like this. Not as the ruler of a company, but as a man who had finally lost the only person who'd ever looked at him and seen more than ambition. He pulled his phone from his pocket and typed a message, not to send but to write what he couldn't say aloud. You can run, Isla. You're allowed, but you don't have to hide to be safe. He deleted it before the screen could dim. Words wouldn't reach her now. Only actions would. He stood and turned toward the door. His reflection in the glass was unflinching, the man everyone knew. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. He would find her, not because he needed control, but because he finally understood what losing her would mean. And Dominic Hart didn't lose. He adapted. He evolved. And this time, evolution meant learning how to love without destroying what he touched. The rain had stopped by the time he reached the street again. He looked up at the skyline, where his tower cut through the clouds, gleaming with the light of his name. For years, that building had symbolized victory. Tonight, it looked like a monument to everything he'd taken for granted. He whispered to the air, "You wanted freedom. I'll give it to you. But not like this." His phone buzzed again, a message from his security chief. "We have a lead. Small coastal town. Ticket purchased under alias." Dominic's hand tightened around the phone. He didn't reply. He simply walked toward the waiting car, each step echoing with purpose. She wanted distance. He would give her space. But when she was ready to stop running, he'd be there, not to reclaim her, but to prove that empire meant nothing without her in it. And when that day came, the world would see not the man they feared, but the man she'd once believed he could be.
Freedom didn't feel like air. It felt like absence. For 2 weeks, Isla Ward lived in a world without headlines, boardrooms, or Dominic Hart's shadow at her back. The small coastal town she had chosen barely existed on a map: 1 gas station, 2 cafes, a single post office that still closed for lunch. The ocean stretched beyond her rented cottage, cold and constant, its rhythm the only heartbeat she trusted. Every morning she woke to the sound of gulls, made tea on a stove older than her, and tried to remember what it felt like to belong to herself. She was learning, slowly. The locals didn't ask questions. They called her Miss Ward and assumed she was a writer escaping the city, which in a way wasn't wrong. She was rewriting something, even if she didn't know what the ending looked like yet. The quiet should have been enough. But silence is never kind when your life used to move at the speed of crisis. Sometimes she caught herself drafting imaginary press statements for no one, phrases spinning in her head like the rhythm of survival. Control the narrative, shape the truth, contain the fallout. Old habits didn't die, they lingered, patient and sharp. And then there was the other habit, checking the news. Even after she'd sworn she wouldn't, she'd wake in the middle of the night and open her laptop, heart pounding. Hart Industries was everywhere. Acquisition headlines, investor praise, images of Dominic at press conferences, unshaken as ever. He looked fine, unmoved. The same ruthless calm she had once admired now made her chest ache. She wondered if he ever thought of her at all, or if he'd neatly erased her, the way she'd erased him in front of the world. But when the nausea came again, sudden and fierce, she knew the truth was more complicated. She didn't need him to think of her. She needed to stop thinking of him. By the 3rd week, she found a routine. Mornings at the cafe, Afternoons by the sea, evenings writing in a notebook, not press statements this time, but fragments of thoughts, memories, pieces of herself she was trying to put back together. That's where she was one gray afternoon, tucked into the corner booth by the window, steam rising from her cup when the local news channel flickered on the small TV above the counter. Breaking update on Hart Industries' major expansion, the anchor announced. Isla's pen froze mid-sentence. The screen showed Dominic stepping out of a sleek black car, flanked by executives. Behind him, a banner, Brightline Communications acquisition completed. Her stomach turned. She'd heard of Brightline, a boutique media firm specializing in corporate reputation management. It was the kind of move only someone who understood narratives would make. Someone like Dominic. Someone like her. He's consolidating control, she whispered to herself. What was that, hon? The waitress asked, refilling her cup. Nothing, just talking to myself. But the calm she'd been building fractured. If Dominic owned Brightline, it meant he owned the story now. Every outlet, every whisper that shaped public opinion. It wasn't just a power move. It was a message. I'm still writing your ending. Isla closed her notebook. Her pulse thudded. She'd thought she could disappear quietly, fade into anonymity, start over. But this was a reminder that even in absence, Dominic Hart's reach was infinite. She paid for her tea, murmured a thank you, and walked quickly into the cold. The sea wind slapped her face like a wake-up call. She had to move again. She couldn't risk him finding her, except deep down, she already knew he had. It started that evening. Small signs at first. A black sedan parked at the end of the street. A man in a suit pretending to read a newspaper at the cafe. The landlord calling to say her rent had been taken care of, though she hadn't paid. Her breath caught at that last one. Taken care of by who? He'd smiled nervously over the phone. A Mr. D. Hart, said to tell you not to worry. The room had spun. She hung up without replying. By nightfall, her suitcase was open again. But this time, packing didn't feel like escape. It felt like surrender. Because she knew, before he even appeared, that he wouldn't chase her twice. If Dominic Hart had sent people to find her, it was because he intended to look her in the eye when she realized the truth. She hadn't escaped. She'd only given him time to prepare the next move. She didn't sleep. The next morning, she went into town early, hoping to find a train out before the sun rose. The station was nearly empty. A single clerk, a stray cat, the sound of waves in the distance. Her ticket trembled in her hand. One way, no destination yet decided. She just needed distance. Again. The elevator doors at the back of the station led to the platform above. She pressed the button and stepped inside. The doors began to close, and then they stopped. A hand caught the frame. Familiar, steady, inevitable. He stepped inside like he belonged there. Dominic. He didn't look out of place in the small coastal elevator, though everything about him screamed power and precision. The black coat, the calm posture, the eyes that never missed a thing. Her pulse roared in her ears. How did you? You left the envelope, he said simply. His voice was quiet, even too even. I waited until I opened it, she swallowed. You weren't supposed to. I wasn't supposed to let you vanish either. The elevator began to rise. The hum filled the silence between them. He studied her, not the way a man looks at a woman he loves, but the way a strategist studies a map. You chose well, he said. Quiet town, cash payments, no paper trail, almost perfect. Almost? She asked bitterly. His gaze softened a fraction. You still used your real name for the doctor's follow-up. She turned away, eyes burning. Of course you checked. I had to make sure you were safe. Stop calling it that, she snapped. It's not protection when I didn't ask for it. Would you rather I left you alone to disappear into obscurity? Pretend you don't exist while you carry my child? The words hit like a blade. This isn't about you. It's about both of us, he said, voice tightening. You made that true the moment you decided to lie for me. The elevator chimed, doors sliding open to the empty platform. Neither moved. Finally, she said, You have everything, Dominic. The company, the press, the power. Why do you need this, too? He looked at her for a long time, and when he spoke, it wasn't the CEO speaking. It was the man she'd once seen behind the glass. Because the night you lied for me, you stopped being part of the company. You became the only thing I couldn't control, and the only thing I don't want to lose. Her breath caught. You already lost me. He stepped forward slowly, closing the distance between them. Then let me earn you back. By owning me again? She whispered. He shook his head. By understanding what it costs to let you walk away. The train horn sounded below, a low, distant wail that filled the cold morning air. She looked down the platform. Freedom, 10 steps away. Behind her, Dominic waited, silent, unflinching. He wasn't blocking the door. He wasn't begging. He was giving her a choice, or pretending to. She hated him for it, and loved him for it. I can't go back, she said finally. I'm not asking you to. His voice softened, almost human. I'm asking you not to run. She turned, eyes shining with unshed tears. That's the same thing. He didn't move. You think so now? The doors behind her hissed closed again. The platform emptied around them, the sound of the train fading into the distance. For the first time since the press conference, Isla felt the weight of everything she'd done. The lies, the flight, the exhaustion of pretending she didn't love a man she could never fully trust. Dominic reached into his coat pocket and handed her something, a folded contract. She hesitated before taking it. What is this? Your next job, he said. At Brightline Communications. Her head snapped up. You're joking. I'm not. The company's real. Independent. On paper, you'll report to a regional manager, but it's yours to run. She stared at him, stunned. You're giving me a company? I'm giving you control, he said quietly. The freedom you said I couldn't offer. Her throat tightened. Why? Because I'd rather share power with you than spend the rest of my life fighting you. The wind rushed through the platform, cold and briny. Isla looked at him, the man who had once ruled her world and was now offering to rebuild it in her name. For the first time, she didn't see dominance. She saw surrender, the kind that costs more than victory. She folded the papers slowly. I'll think about it. That's all I ask, he said. They stood there in silence, the sea beyond them vast and endless. Finally, she whispered, You found me. He smiled faintly. You made yourself easy to find. And then, softer, Next time, don't run. Just tell me where you're going. When he left, she stayed on the platform, the papers still in her hands. The train was gone, but the wind carried the faint sound of waves and possibility. She didn't know if she could trust him again, but for the first time, she didn't feel hunted. She felt seen, and maybe, just maybe, that was a start.
Control was never about possession. It was about timing, knowing when to tighten your grip and when to let the world believe it had slipped through your fingers. Dominic Hart had spent his entire life perfecting that balance, until Isla Ward had shattered it with one word, no. He hadn't stopped thinking about that elevator. The soft defiance in her voice, the tremor of fear she tried to hide behind logic, the way she'd looked at him, like she still loved him, but hated herself for it. He'd left her there with the offer in her hand and the wind at her back, because forcing her had never worked. He'd learned that the hard way. She wasn't the kind of woman you chased. She was the kind of woman you built a world around and waited for her to walk back into it. So he built one. 3 days later, the office of Brightline Communications hummed with the kind of quiet ambition he recognized instantly. It reminded him of her, precise, composed, slightly too clean. Everything about it bore his signature, though no one here would know it. Brightline was legally independent, publicly owned by a shell firm, but privately held in trust under a name that meant nothing to anyone except him, IW Holdings. He'd written the initials himself. His assistant met him in the hallway as he arrived. Good morning, sir. We've completed onboarding for the new director, Ms. Ward. She starts today. He didn't look up from his phone. Make sure she has full access. No limitations. Yes, sir. Would you like to meet her when she arrives? He paused. No. Let her see what she's inherited first. He didn't need to be there to see her reaction. He could already imagine it, the mix of suspicion, anger, reluctant admiration. Isla had always been too smart for flattery. The only way to reach her now was to hand her power and trust that she'd know how to use it. Still, when the elevator doors slid open that afternoon, and she stepped out in a crisp ivory blouse and that same unshakable composure, his pulse betrayed him. He wasn't supposed to be here. He'd told himself he wouldn't be. But watching her walk through his creation was something he couldn't deny himself. She looked around the sleek office space, her expression unreadable. Staff murmured greetings. Someone handed her a tablet, another offered coffee. Her professionalism never cracked, not even when she saw the etched brass plaque on the glass wall of her new office. Isla Ward, Director, Strategic Communications. For a moment, she didn't move. Then her hand brushed over the letters, slow, hesitant, reverent, as if testing whether this version of her life was real. He stayed behind the glass, unseen, watching. His assistant glanced at him. "Do you want me to announce you now?" Dominic shook his head. Not yet. He wanted her to feel ownership first, to understand the shape of freedom before she realized who had carved it for her. Isla moved through the office like a woman trying not to look over her shoulder. Dominic had seen that posture before, poised but defensive. The stance of someone used to surviving in rooms where she was both respected and hunted. She paused by the window, looking out over the skyline. Her reflection merged with his through the glass wall separating them. Two silhouettes divided by distance, united by everything unspoken. He could almost hear her thoughts. Why this city? Why this job? Why now? The answer was simple. Because it was time. He stepped forward then, opening the door between them. Her spine stiffened at the sound. She didn't turn. Isla. Dominic. Her tone was polite, cool, too professional to be natural. You weren't supposed to be here. He closed the door quietly behind him. I wasn't supposed to do a lot of things. Yet here we are. She turned then, arms crossed, eyes sharp. You think buying me a company changes anything? No, he said. I think it gives you the choice you never trusted me to offer. She gave a short, bitter laugh. You think control disguised as freedom is a choice? He walked closer, keeping his tone measured. You're the director, Isla. You set your own terms, hire your own people, run your own strategies. I've given you independence in every way that matters. In every way except the one that does, she said softly. Because you still own it. He didn't deny it. Ownership is protection. You know that. Her jaw tightened. You always find a way to make control sound noble. He almost smiled. And you always make defiance sound like virtue. The air between them thickened. Silence stretched, the kind that hummed with electricity. Why me? She asked finally. You could have anyone running this firm. Because no one else understands the balance between power and restraint like you do. That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters. For a heartbeat, neither looked away. The city beyond them blurred, the rest of the world dissolving into quiet irrelevance. Then her expression softened, just slightly. You really believe you can fix this with a job title? He stepped closer. No. I believe I can fix it by giving you something I've never given anyone, control over what I care about most. She searched his face for deception, the way she used to in the early days, when she hadn't yet realized that every truth he spoke was half a weapon. Finally, she said, You're still the same. And you, he said quietly, are still the only person who can make me forget why I became that way. He left before she could respond. It was better that way. Too much truth between them had always led to disaster. By evening, she'd accepted the position formally. His assistant delivered the signed contract, her neat signature scrawled beneath the company's seal. He read it once, then set it down, his thumb tracing her name. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. He'd made his move. Now it was her turn. That night, the building emptied early. Only the low hum of servers and the faint pulse of elevator lights kept him company. Dominic stood at the window of his private office on the top floor, looking down at the city that had once seemed to bow to his will. Below him, the world moved in miniature, headlights streaming like capillaries of light, people scattering like thoughts. From this height, control felt easy. From this height, everything was an illusion. A soft chime sounded. The private elevator doors slid open behind him. He didn't turn. He already knew who it was. Couldn't sleep, he asked quietly. I didn't realize you still worked this late, Isla said. Her voice carried differently in the stillness, less guarded, more human. I never stopped, he said. You did. That's what happens when you burn people out, she replied. He turned then. She was standing just inside the doorway, barefoot now, heels in one hand, hair falling loose from the bun she'd worn earlier. It hit him, unreasonably hard, how ordinary she looked. Ordinary and irreplaceable. I came to return something, she said, holding up a folder. He arched a brow. Already rewriting my terms? It's what you hired me for. He took the folder from her and opened it. Inside was a proposal, new messaging for Brightline's first public statement. Her handwriting in the margins. Notes about narrative tone, phrasing that humanized the brand. Exactly her voice. He closed the folder slowly. You never do anything halfway. I don't know how, she said. You taught me that. He gestured toward the chair opposite his desk. Sit. She hesitated, then did. For a few moments, neither spoke. The air between them hummed with all the words they'd avoided for weeks. "Why did you come back?" he asked finally. "I didn't," she said. "You found me." "That's not an answer. It's the truth." He nodded once, accepting it. "Then why stay?" Her gaze flicked to the skyline. "Because you're right about one thing. I know how to control a story better than anyone else. And if I don't stay, someone else will write it for me. Someone like me." She looked back at him. "Exactly." He studied her face in silence. There was a new steadiness there, a kind of quiet steel that hadn't been there before she ran. Maybe the distance had done what he couldn't, freed her from fear. "Then stay," he said. "But stay on your terms." "I intend to." He almost smiled. "Good. I've spent years teaching people how to follow orders. It might be time I learn how to take one." Something flickered in her eyes, amusement, maybe disbelief. "You won't like it." "I don't have to." She stood then, crossing her arms, studying him the way she used to before delivering bad news. "You know, Dominic, you're dangerous when you start sounding honest." He met her gaze. "And you're dangerous when you start believing me." The words hung between them like smoke. Later, after she'd gone, he found her folder still on the edge of his desk. Her handwriting lingered there, curling through the margins like something alive. He traced one line with his finger. "Truth can't always be sold, but it can be framed." He laughed under his breath. That was Isla, always finding poetry in precision. He slipped the page into a separate drawer, one no one else ever opened. A collection of things that mattered more than they should. Her old lanyard, the first pen she'd borrowed and never returned, the photograph from the company gala where they'd stood too close for professionalism. He closed the drawer quietly. Tomorrow, she'd run Brightline. Tomorrow, the board would see a woman they could no longer treat as a liability. Tomorrow, he'd sit across from her in meetings and pretend the distance didn't ache. But tonight, for the first time, Dominic allowed himself a thought he'd never risked before. Maybe power didn't have to mean isolation. Maybe control could coexist with trust. Maybe the only way to protect her was to stop protecting himself. He turned off the office lights. The city beyond the glass glowed soft and gold. Somewhere far below, Isla was probably doing the same, writing, thinking, building something of her own. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the need to chase. He felt aligned. He smiled once, faintly. Tomorrow would bring questions, negotiations, and the relentless noise of business. But tonight, for a fleeting moment, the world was balanced, his empire intact, his heart in motion, his control finally rewritten.
It started with light, a sterile white beam cutting across the glass desk, catching the edge of her pen as it rolled off the paper. Isla blinked at it, disoriented, her focus slipping for the first time all day. The room tilted, just a fraction, and the letters on her screen blurred into smoke. She pressed her fingers to her temples. "Not now," she murmured. The office was quiet, except for the faint hum of the air conditioning and the muffled noise of the city far below. It was past 8, long after the rest of Brightline had gone home. Only she stayed, as always, chasing perfection through exhaustion. A faint nausea rippled through her, sharp and sudden. She took a deep breath, forced herself upright, and tried to continue editing the press release. But the words wouldn't stay still. Her hand trembled over the mouse. The room spun again, harder this time. A wave of heat flushed up her neck, the kind that came from somewhere deeper than the body's surface. A warning, a rebellion. "Breathe," she told herself. "Just breathe." She'd done too much. Too many 12-hour days, too much caffeine, too many skipped meals. The doctor had warned her about this, quietly, with that same patient tone Isla hated. You can't outrun biology forever. She should have listened. The sound of the elevator sliding open reached her through the glass walls. She froze. It was late, too late for anyone to still be in the building. Footsteps crossed the marble floor, slow, deliberate. "Isla." The voice was deep, low, and unmistakable. "Dominic." She didn't turn around. "You have a talent for showing up when I least expect you." "Then I'll stop pretending it's coincidence," he said. She could hear the faint smirk in his voice, the kind that used to infuriate her, then undo her, then both at once. He stopped a few steps behind her. "You've been working since 6 this morning? You keep tabs on my hours now?" "On everything," he said quietly. "That was part of the deal." She laughed softly, without humor. "Of course it was." He stepped closer. "You're pale." "I'm fine." "You're not." "I said I'm—" The room spun again, and her sentence broke mid-word. Her knees gave out before she could catch herself. Strong hands caught her just as the world tilted to black. When she opened her eyes, she was on the couch in his office. Dim light pooled around them, the city beyond the glass a constellation of gold and white. Dominic knelt beside her, one hand steady on her wrist, his expression unreadable. "You fainted," he said, voice quiet but edged with something she couldn't name. Fear, maybe, though he'd never admit it. She tried to sit up, but his hand pressed gently to her shoulder. "Stay still." "I'm fine," she whispered again, softer now. He gave her a look that made the word fine sound like a sin. "You need a doctor. I already have one." "And when was the last time you saw them?" "Last week." His gaze sharpened. "What did they say?" "Nothing that concerns you." He exhaled slowly. "Everything about you concerns me." Her heart stuttered once. "Dominic, don't," he said. "Don't use my name like that unless you mean it." The silence that followed was heavy. He stood, crossing to the cabinet where he kept water and glasses. His movements were precise, efficient, but she saw the tension in them, the tightness of a man keeping himself from panic. He brought her the glass. She took it with trembling fingers. "Drink," he said simply. She did. The cool water steadied her, though her pulse still thundered in her ears. He watched her the entire time, his gaze unwavering. When she finished, he set the glass aside and knelt again, his hand brushing against her wrist to check her pulse. It was an old habit, control disguised as care. She caught his wrist. "You don't have to do this." "I do," he said quietly, "because you won't." Their eyes locked. The air between them shifted, tighter, closer, charged with everything they hadn't said since the night she'd left. She felt the warmth of his hand under her fingers, the solid weight of him grounding her to the present. Her voice came out as a whisper. "You shouldn't have come." "I had to," he said. "You weren't answering calls. I was working. You were disappearing again." The words landed like an accusation and a plea at once. "I'm here," she said. "You found me. I always will." That quiet certainty, the way he said it without arrogance, without force, broke something inside her. She turned her head toward the window, trying to steady her breathing. The reflection caught her face beside his in the glass, two people who had built an empire on lies and found truth only in the dark. "Why are you really here, Dominic?" she asked. He hesitated. "Because I needed to see if you were real." "Real?" He nodded once. "After everything, I started to think I'd imagined you, the only woman who could dismantle me with silence." "You're impossible," she whispered. "So are you," he said, with a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "That's why we work." "Work?" she echoed. "That's what this is to you?" "No," he said. "That's what everything else is. This, whatever this is, has nothing to do with work." Her throat tightened. "Don't." He stood, pacing to the far side of the office. "You're shaking. Because you make everything harder." He turned back to her. "You think I want that? I think you don't know how to want anything without controlling it." He didn't deny it. He rarely did. "Then teach me," he said softly. The words stopped her cold. She looked up at him. This man who had built his life on dominance and logic, now standing there asking for something that sounded dangerously close to surrender. "Teach you what?" she asked. "How to love you without breaking you." The air left her lungs. For a long time, neither spoke. The city's hum filled the silence, distant and steady, as if time had paused just for them. For a heartbeat, she thought she'd imagined his words. Dominic Hart didn't ask to be taught anything. He commanded. He built, dismantled, owned. But there he was, standing a few feet away, the night wind moving the hem of his shirt, his voice stripped of armor. "Dominic." He shook his head once, cutting off whatever apology she might have tried to form. "You don't owe me an answer." The rain began again, tapping against the window panes like the echo of an old memory. Isla drew her knees up on the couch and stared out at the city. She'd spent so many nights in offices like this, clean lines, expensive glass, places where emotion was something you locked outside before the doors closed. Now emotion filled it, tangible as the rain. She whispered, "You can't fix what broke between us by being gentle for a night." "I know." "Then why keep trying?" He took a slow breath. "Because when you collapsed in my arms, every instinct I've spent my life trusting told me the same thing. If she falls again, I want her to fall where I can catch her." It wasn't a confession so much as a surrender. Isla's throat tightened. "You don't understand. The minute you start caring, you make me small again. I can't breathe inside your version of safety. His answer came after a long silence. Then breathe where I can see you. I'll stand far enough away that it doesn't feel like protection. The simplicity of it undid her more than any promise could have. She pressed her palms to her eyes. You make it sound so easy. It's not. But I've learned that the hardest things are the ones that matter. When she looked up, he was watching her with that same impossible steadiness. She wanted to hate it. She wanted to lean into it. Both impulses collided until she felt dizzy again. He noticed. Lie back, he said quietly. I'm fine. You're trembling. Dominic. He didn't touch her. He simply sat beside the couch, close enough that she could feel the calm radiating from him. Just rest. No negotiations. His tone, gentle command, never force, disarmed her more effectively than insistence ever could. Herself sink against the cushions. Minutes passed. The rhythm of the rain and his breathing steadied her. Will you keep working like this? He asked eventually. I don't know how to stop, she admitted. It's the only thing that keeps me from feeling everything else. Then let me help. You can't. I can try. She smiled faintly, eyes still closed. You never learned how to leave anything alone, did you? No, he said. Especially not you. When she finally opened her eyes again, the clock on the far wall read nearly midnight. Dominic had moved to the other side of the couch, scrolling through emails on his phone, the glow painting his face in silver light. She pushed herself up. You don't have to babysit me. His eyes lifted. I wasn't. Then what were you doing? Learning to stay still. The corner of her mouth lifted despite herself. How's that going? Poorly. She laughed, the sound soft but real. He watched her as if the sound itself were proof she'd survived. Then, more quietly, she said, The doctor wants me to cut my hours. The pregnancy's stable, but stress isn't helping. His expression didn't change, but she felt the tension shift through the air. How bad? It's fine. Isla. It's fine, she repeated. But I can't keep pretending nothing's different, and I can't keep hiding it forever. The press will find out eventually. He set the phone aside. Let them. You don't mean that. Yes, I do. Dominic, if this gets out now... They'll say what they always say, he interrupted. That I'm controlling, that you're ambitious, that we built an empire on lies. Let them. I'm done trading truth for comfort. The conviction in his voice scared her more than any threat. He wasn't protecting the company this time. He was protecting her, and that was infinitely more dangerous. She whispered, You'll destroy yourself. He shook his head. No, I'll redefine what it means to be untouchable. For the first time, she saw the man who'd spent a lifetime wielding power decide to use it for something human. It was terrifying. It was beautiful. She touched her stomach instinctively. And if I'm not ready for the world to know? He paused, then nodded. Then I wait. Your timeline, not mine. The answer came too easily. It unsettled her. You mean that? He smiled faintly. When I make a promise, it's law. Even if it costs you, especially then. The honesty in his voice cracked something inside her walls. She reached for her bag, pulling out a small photo from the envelope the doctor had given her. A grainy printout of the sonogram. She handed it to him. His hands were steady when he took it, but the moment his eyes focused on the image, the calm faltered. He stared at it like a man seeing proof of something he didn't dare believe. That's 8 weeks and 4 days, she finished for him. Now 9. He didn't speak. Just ran his thumb along the edge of the paper as if it were made of glass. When he finally looked up, the composure was gone. In its place was something raw, unguarded. I don't deserve either of you. Probably not, she said softly, but that's not the point. He laughed under his breath, the sound rough. No, I suppose it isn't. She leaned back, exhaustion pulling at her again. Take me home, Dominic. He rose immediately. You shouldn't drive. I meant to my apartment, not yours. I know. He offered his hand. She hesitated, then took it. His fingers closed around hers. Not possessive, not demanding, just certain. The steadiness of it silenced every argument. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city glowed, wet and new, the streets shining like mirrors. They walked through the lobby without speaking. Security nodded as they passed. No one dared question the sight of Dominic Hart guiding Isla Ward to his waiting car. Inside, the silence between them was no longer heavy. It was simply full. As the driver pulled away, Isla leaned her head against the window. The city lights blurred into soft halos. Dominic's voice broke the quiet. When I first built Hart Industries, I thought perfection meant control, that if I could predict every outcome, nothing could touch me. And now? She asked. He looked at her, eyes dark and steady. Now I know that everything worth having is unpredictable. She smiled faintly. That's terrifying. Yes, he said. It is. The car slowed in front of her building. He got out first, opened her door, and offered his hand again. She took it, stepping onto the pavement, her reflection mirrored in the wet concrete beneath them. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For catching me. He didn't reply, only brushed his thumb once across her wrist before letting go. Get some rest. She nodded. Good night, Dominic. He watched her walk inside, waited until the elevator doors closed, and then turned back to the car. For the first time in months, Isla felt something close to safety, not because he'd promised it, but because, for one fleeting night, she believed him.
The storm broke at dawn, not the kind that lived outside his windows. This one had been building in him for days, quiet and precise, the way all dangerous things began. Dominic Hart stood in front of the glass wall of his office, watching the city inhale the first fragile light. His reflection looked like it belonged to someone else. The same measured posture, the same crisp suit, but eyes darker, sharper, as if something had finally shifted behind them. It had been 4 nights since Isla fainted in his office. 4 nights since she'd handed him that sonogram and said, now 9. The image lived on his desk now, protected under glass, half hidden beneath contracts and market summaries. Every morning, he caught himself straightening it, aligning its corners with impossible precision, as if order could disguise meaning. He told himself it was control. It wasn't. She'd gone back to her apartment after that night, insisted on space. He had let her, because forcing her had never worked. But the distance felt wrong this time, off balance, as if every breath she took outside his reach carried a new risk. By the 4th morning, risk wasn't something he was willing to negotiate. The decision formed as naturally as breathing. She wouldn't stay there. Not alone. Not now. He walked into the boardroom 30 minutes later, calm restored, every trace of turmoil buried under the armor of routine. Mr. Hart, his assistant, greeted him, following with a tablet. You have media calls at 9, Brightline integration brief at 10, and cancel everything after noon, he said. She hesitated. All of it, sir? All of it. His tone left no room for hesitation. Yes, sir. He sat at the head of the table as his team filed in. The meeting lasted exactly 17 minutes. Numbers, projections, words that had once meant everything. Today they sounded like static. His thoughts kept circling back to one image. Isla's hand pressed against her stomach as she slept, the faint tremor in her breath. When the meeting ended, he rose before anyone else could stand. That's all. They scattered, grateful and uneasy. He left without another word. By noon, Dominic was in the car. The driver didn't ask where to. He never had to. The sky had darkened again by the time they reached Isla's building. Low clouds pressing against glass towers, the kind of gray that promised rain but hadn't yet delivered. He told his security detail to wait outside. This wasn't a conversation for witnesses. The elevator carried him up in silence. Every floor ticked by like the seconds of a countdown he'd already decided would end on his terms. When the doors opened, the hallway smelled faintly of coffee and something softer, lavender maybe. Her door was half open. She was home. He pushed it the rest of the way and stepped inside. Isla stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by boxes. She looked up as he entered, startled. Dominic. He closed the door behind him. Going somewhere. Her lips parted, but no sound came for a moment. I told you I needed space. I gave you space, he said evenly. 48 hours worth. That's not space, that's surveillance. It's mercy, he said, voice calm but firm. And it's over. Her eyes narrowed. You don't get to decide when mercy ends. Someone has to. She set the tape dispenser down on the counter with a sharp click. You don't understand. I understand exactly, he cut in. You're exhausted. You're working too much. You're not eating enough. And every doctor in this city would tell you what I already know. You can't do this alone. Her shoulders stiffened. You think I'm weak? No, he said quietly. I think you're human. That stopped her. He walked closer, each step deliberate. You don't need to prove strength by breaking yourself. She folded her arms. And what's your solution? Lock me in the penthouse until I give birth. His expression didn't change. If that's what it takes to keep you safe, yes. The silence that followed cracked through the room like lightning. She stared at him, stunned. You can't mean that. He did, but not the way she thought. I mean, he said slowly, you come with me. I have a place outside the city. Quiet. Secure. You work remotely if you need to. You don't disappear again. I can't just. You can, he interrupted. And you will. Her pulse fluttered visibly at her throat. And if I say no? His jaw tightened. Then I'll follow you anyway. Dominic, I'm not threatening you. His voice lowered. I'm telling you what happens when I'm afraid. She went still. You're afraid? Yes. The word came out raw, stripped of pride. For you. For the baby. For whatever this is between us that I keep pretending isn't the only thing that still makes sense. Something broke in her gaze then, a flicker of the old Isla, the one who used to see the man under the armor. He stepped closer, close enough to see the way her breath trembled. I built an empire to keep the world under control. But you're the one thing I can't predict. I don't know how to keep you safe without keeping you close. Then you don't trust me, she whispered. He shook his head. I don't trust the world. Her voice softened. And what if I trust myself? He looked at her for a long moment, then said, Then I'll learn how to do the same. But not from here. Pack what you need. Dominic, you have 48 hours. Or what? His voice was quiet but final. Or I come back, and we leave on my terms. He turned toward the door, giving her space to argue, to shout, to stop him. She didn't. Behind him, the sound of rain began against the windows, soft but insistent. He paused at the threshold. Isla. She didn't look up. You think I'm trying to control you, he said. Maybe you're right. But the only reason I ever built walls was because I didn't trust anyone to guard what mattered. He waited a heartbeat. You're what matters. And then he left. The rain didn't stop all day. It carved silver lines down the windows of the car, matching the rhythm of his thoughts. Dominic rarely replayed a conversation once it was over. Words were tools. Once used, they either built or broke. But the sound of Isla's voice, low, defiant, frightened, looped through his mind until it filled every quiet corner. He'd given her 48 hours. He hadn't meant it as an ultimatum, but he knew that's how she'd heard it. Maybe it was. Mercy and control looked the same from the outside. He spent the next morning doing what he did best, turning chaos into structure. Orders went out to his security division to increase the watch around Isla's building. Not to cage her, but to keep a distance that still counted as protection. Her address was flagged with a quiet alert. No entry without direct authorization. He reviewed market reports, signed off on 3 acquisitions, and even smiled through a board call. To everyone else, the CEO looked untouchable again. The machine was functioning. But under the calm, there was the constant pulse of waiting. That night, he drove himself to the estate on the edge of the river. It was the property he never used anymore, too far from the city, too quiet for a man who thrived on movement. The house stood surrounded by trees, its windows warm in the darkness, the lake behind it still as glass. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and rain. Staff had cleaned and prepared it without question. A single light burned in the great room, reflecting off the black piano that had belonged to his mother. Dominic walked through the halls, checking the security systems, the guest rooms, the study. It was a ritual more than necessity, making sure the place looked lived in. It was ready for her. He caught himself at the threshold of the last room, the one overlooking the lake. Pale curtains swayed with the draft, and beyond them the water shimmered under moonlight. He tried to picture Isla here. No boardrooms, no glass walls, just her voice echoing softly across the water. For the first time, the thought didn't feel impossible. The next day passed in deliberate silence. He didn't call her, didn't send a message, didn't send anyone. If she came, it would be her choice. That was the test. Not of loyalty, of trust. He lasted 36 hours. When the clock hit noon on the second day, he folded his laptop shut and reached for his coat. The city looked different when you drove without agenda. The pace of traffic, the changing lights, the blur of lives intersecting. He'd built his fortune on the illusion that he could predict every variable, but love, real love, refused the math. At her building, he told the driver to wait. The doorman looked up, startled, but didn't stop him. Everyone learned quickly not to. The elevator ride felt longer this time. When the doors opened, her hallway was quiet again, but not empty. A single suitcase sat against the wall beside her door. She opened it before he could knock. Isla looked calm. No makeup, hair loose, a faint tiredness behind her eyes, but calm. I was hoping you'd at least knock, she said. I thought you'd prefer honesty. She stepped back, letting him in. The apartment was half-packed, boxes labeled in her neat handwriting. The air smelled like rain and the faint trace of lavender she always carried. I'm not doing this because you ordered it, she said. I'm doing it because you were right about one thing. I can't keep standing still. He nodded once. I didn't come to argue. I'm sure you didn't, she murmured. You never do when you know you've already won. He frowned. This isn't winning. Then what is it? He looked around the room, the books stacked in careful piles, the mug still half full on the counter, the life she'd tried to make without him. It's a beginning. She studied him for a moment, searching for the trick. You're different today. No, he said quietly. I'm the same man. I've just stopped pretending I can't be afraid. Something in her expression softened, almost in spite of herself. What if I don't know how to trust that? Then I'll earn it the same way you taught me to earn everything else, by showing up. The words came out steady, but his pulse wasn't. He hadn't realized how much of himself he'd been holding back until now. She walked past him, to the window. Outside, the rain had slowed to a mist. The city looked muted, softer. What happens after 48 hours, Dominic? She asked quietly. He moved beside her, his reflection aligning with hers in the glass. After 48 hours, we stop surviving and start living. She let out a small, disbelieving laugh. You make it sound so simple. It's not, he admitted. But it's the only promise I know how to keep. He reached into his pocket and handed her a key. She looked down at it, small, silver-worn. What's this? The river house, he said. It's yours as much as mine now. If you decide to come, use the front door. Don't knock. And if I don't come, then I'll wait until you do. The words hung in the air between them, a truce written in quiet rather than ink. When he left, she didn't follow him to the door. She stayed by the window, the key still in her hand, her face unreadable. Outside, the sky began to break apart, a thin strip of sunlight piercing through gray. Dominic looked up once, then down at the reflection in the car window as he slid inside. He didn't know if she'd come. For the first time in his life, that uncertainty didn't feel like weakness. It felt like faith. That night, he sat alone at the river house, a book open but unread on the table. The lake outside shimmered with the lights from the house. Each sound, the faint rustle of trees, the echo of rain, felt sharper somehow, as if the world was waiting too. He told himself he wouldn't watch the clock. He did anyway. 9 o'clock. 10. Midnight. Nothing. He exhaled, stood, and crossed to the window. The reflection staring back at him was one he didn't quite recognize. A man not lost, not victorious, simply suspended in the space between. Then, through the faint hum of the storm, he heard it. Tires on gravel. Headlights swept across the glass. He didn't move until the sound stopped, until the silence folded back over itself. Then the front door opened quietly. Isla stood in the entryway, rain still in her hair, her suitcase behind her. She looked at him the same way she had that night in the boardroom months ago, like she was choosing something terrifying and inevitable. You're late, he said. She smiled faintly. You gave me 48 hours. I used them. He didn't smile, but his shoulders eased, the first visible crack in the steel. Welcome home, he said.
The lake house smelled like cedar, rain, and restraint. Every surface gleamed with precision, the kind of perfection that made her want to touch things just to leave a fingerprint. Dominic's world had always been spotless, curated, quiet to the point of suffocation. But here, under the hum of the rain and the soft flicker of firelight, it felt different. Still powerful, still deliberate, but lived in, somehow. He stood by the window as she stepped inside, his posture a study in composure. The lamplight drew a faint gold line down the side of his face, and for one dizzy second she remembered what it had felt like to fall in love with his stillness, before she understood that silence was just another form of control. He didn't move toward her. He never did. He just watched, eyes dark and unreadable as she crossed the threshold. "Did you drive yourself?" he asked quietly. "I did." He nodded once, approving, as if she'd passed a test he hadn't mentioned. "Was the road clear?" "Mostly. You should fix the south drive. It's washed out near the turn." "I will." The conversation sounded like business, not reunion. It was easier that way. She set her suitcase by the stairs and rubbed her palms together for warmth. "So this is where you disappear when the city gets too small." He turned, finally, one corner of his mouth lifting. "You sound surprised." I am. I didn't think you believed in places like this. I don't, he said, but you do. Something in her chest shifted. You built this for me? For peace, he said after a pause. And yes, you're part of that. There it was again, that impossible mix of honesty and control. Every time he gave her one truth, it came wrapped around a dozen secrets. I'm not staying forever, she said softly. I didn't ask you to. No, she murmured, eyes flicking toward the fire. You just made it impossible to leave. He said nothing. Hours later, after she'd showered and changed into the sweater he'd left folded on the bed, she wandered the house while he worked downstairs. The place was huge but quiet, designed with his kind of symmetry. Dark floors, steel fixtures, large windows that made the world outside feel closer than it should. But there were pieces of softness she didn't expect. A worn book on a side table, a half-empty bottle of wine, a photograph of the lake at dusk, edges curled as if touched too often. The man she knew never left evidence of himself anywhere. This house was different. She stopped at the end of the hallway. One door, unlike the rest, stood closed. It wasn't locked, but it felt locked. The handle gleamed like something that dared her to try. She hesitated, fingers hovering just above the cool metal. Behind her, Dominic's voice came from the stairs. You won't find anything in there. She turned sharply. He stood halfway up, one hand on the railing, expression unreadable. I wasn't. You were, he said, not accusing, just certain. Go ahead. She blinked. You're giving me permission? I'm giving you honesty, he said. If you're going to live here, you should know what kind of man you're living with. The air thickened between them. Slowly she turned the handle. The door opened with a quiet click. Inside, the room was dim. No lights. Just the faint gray of late afternoon filtering through the tall windows. It wasn't what she expected. No hidden vault, no secret technology, no trace of the empire he'd built. Just a piano, covered with a soft cloth, and shelves lined with sheet music. Dust motes swirled in the air, dancing through the light. She stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of paper and time. Her fingers brushed the piano lid. You play. I used to. His voice was closer now. She turned. He stood in the doorway, one shoulder against the frame, watching her with that same unreadable calm. What happened? I stopped. Why? He smiled, small and almost self-mocking. Because I realized music only works when you feel something. And at the time, I didn't. Her throat tightened, and now? He met her eyes. Now I do, but I'm out of practice. She looked back at the piano. Play something. He shook his head. No. Why not? Because you'd hear every mistake. I'd forgive them. I wouldn't. The words were quiet, but they struck something in her, the perfectionism that mirrored her own, the impossible standards they both lived by. For the first time, she saw the exhaustion behind his control. She sat on the piano bench and lifted the cover. Dust whispered as it fell away. Then let me play for you. His eyebrows lifted slightly. You? I took lessons for years. It was the only thing my father didn't ruin by making a rule out of it. Play, he said. She placed her hands on the keys. The sound that emerged was soft, uncertain, then steadier. A slow, melodic piece that filled the quiet house like breath returning to lungs. The notes drifted upward, wrapping around them. When she glanced up, Dominic wasn't leaning against the door anymore. He'd moved closer, standing just behind her, the heat of his presence brushing her shoulder. She kept playing, afraid that if she stopped, the spell would break. The final note faded into silence. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then his hand came to rest on the piano's edge, inches from hers. You shouldn't have come into this room. She turned, surprised. You told me to. I told you the truth? I didn't tell you to stay. His eyes met hers, dark, unreadable, but something behind them flickered. Not anger, not warning, just memory. This was my mother's, he said quietly. She used to play when the house went silent. I haven't touched it since the day she died. Her breath caught. Dominic. She taught me that silence can be more dangerous than noise, he continued, that it hides what we're not ready to face. She whispered, and what's hiding in yours? He looked at her for a long time before answering. Fear, the kind that doesn't sound like anything. The honesty of it hit her harder than she expected. She wanted to reach out, to trace the line of his jaw, to tell him that for once he didn't have to be unbreakable. But she didn't. Instead, she said softly, then maybe that's why you stopped hearing the music. He didn't reply. The rain outside began again, light at first, then heavier. It filled the silence between them with rhythm, with something that felt almost like forgiveness. Finally he said, "You should rest. Tomorrow we start over." Start what over? Everything. Later that night, she couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet, too heavy with unsaid things. She wandered downstairs and found him by the fireplace, a book open in his hand, unread. He looked up when she entered. Insomnia? Always. He nodded toward the chair across from him. Sit. She did. For a while, they said nothing. The only sound was the low crackle of the fire. Finally, she asked, "Do you ever regret it? Any of it?" He glanced at her. Which part? The empire. The control. The way you made everyone afraid to breathe too loudly. He thought about it for a moment, then said, "No, regret is for men who've finished building. I'm still working." On what? On becoming someone you can stay with. The words stole the air from her lungs. She looked at him, and in that second, something wordless passed between them. A fragile recognition that neither of them was finished breaking yet, but both were trying. "You can't build me a home," she said softly. "You can only build one beside you." He nodded once. Then start. And just like that, it wasn't a command. It was permission.
The first night she slept at the lake house, the world stopped making sense in the way he'd always demanded it to. No boardrooms, no numbers, no noise, just the sound of rain on glass, and Isla Ward breathing evenly in a room that had been empty for years. Dominic stood in the doorway for too long, one hand against the frame, unsure when observation had turned into reverence. She'd fallen asleep in his sweater, hair tangled from the damp air, one arm curled protectively over the curve of her abdomen. He wasn't supposed to be there. He'd meant to leave her to rest. But some invisible tether held him in place, the kind that had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with the realization that for the first time in his life, he was afraid of peace. Because peace meant there was something to lose. He turned away, forcing himself to walk back down the hall. The floor creaked softly underfoot. In the kitchen, he poured himself a glass of water and stared at the reflection of the window, where lightning flickered far out across the lake. The storm was moving inland, slow, inevitable. He set the glass down, untouched. For years, storms had been easy to read. You studied pressure, you predicted damage, you calculated recovery. But people weren't weather. Isla wasn't. She was the one variable that refused to be measured. By morning, the house felt different. Warmer. Human. She was already awake, barefoot in the kitchen, hair tied loosely at her neck, holding a mug in both hands like the ritual itself mattered more than the coffee. He leaned against the doorway, silent, watching. She noticed him after a moment, a small smile pulling at her mouth. "You don't sleep, do you?" "I try," he said. "How's that working out?" "Poorly." She took a sip, eyes amused. "At least you're consistent." He stepped further in, pulling open a drawer for a spoon. The domesticity of it felt surreal. They had shared crisis, secrecy, power, but never simplicity. "How's your head?" he asked. "Better. The nausea's still there, but manageable. You should be eating more." She gave him a look. "You should stop pretending you're a doctor." "I'm not pretending," he said calmly. "I just don't trust anyone else to take care of you." She shook her head, but there was no sharpness in it, just quiet exasperation, the kind reserved for someone who had already proven impossible to argue with. After breakfast, she wandered the edge of the property, shoes forgotten, wind catching her sweater. Dominic followed at a distance, hands in his pockets, watching her stop occasionally to touch the trees, the stone wall, the moss-covered railing that bordered the lake. She turned suddenly. "You've been following me for 10 minutes. "Not following," he said. "Supervising." Her laugh carried over the water. "You're unbelievable." "So I've been told." She started walking again. "Do you ever stop managing things?" "No, not even now." He paused, considering. "Especially not now." She glanced back at him, eyes softening. "You don't have to control me to protect me." He met her gaze. "That's the part I'm still learning." Something in his tone, quiet, almost vulnerable, disarmed her. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned back toward the lake, staring out at the wide, still expanse of gray-blue water. "Do you ever wonder what it would be like," she said, "to just stop building? To stop trying to fix everything?" He walked closer. "And do what instead? Just exist." He thought about it, really thought about it, and realized he didn't know. He'd spent his entire life mastering futures, not moments. "I wouldn't know where to start," he admitted. "Here's a secret," she said softly. You start by letting the moment be enough. She reached for his hand, just briefly, fingers brushing his, then walked ahead before he could answer. He stood there for a long time, the echo of her touch still in his palm, the storm clouds breaking faintly above the horizon. The next few days blurred into something resembling routine. Isla set up a small workspace by the windows, reviewing press drafts for Brightline and emailing her assistant. Dominic worked from his office across the hall, the distance between them shrinking quietly each time one of them crossed it. It wasn't peace, exactly, more like a ceasefire. At night, she read by the fire while he reviewed contracts he no longer cared about. Occasionally, she'd ask about the company. He'd answer, though less and less with each passing day. The empire was still running, the numbers still perfect, but it all felt small now. One evening, she found him standing by the piano again. The dust cloth was gone. I thought you said you don't play anymore, she said. I don't. Then why uncover it? He looked at the keys, faintly illuminated by the dying light. Because I think I might remember how. Play something. He hesitated, then sat. His hands hovered over the keys, fingers flexing once before pressing down. The sound was rough, uneven at first, then smoother as memory caught up. A simple melody filled the air, low and imperfect. Isla leaned against the doorframe, watching him. For the first time, he looked human, not like a man commanding a room, but like one learning how to exist in it. When he finished, she said quietly, You remember more than you think. He glanced over his shoulder. You're making a habit of being right. Someone has to. A faint smile ghosted across his mouth. You never did learn how to take a compliment. Maybe I learned it from you. The words lingered. So did the silence after them. That night, she woke to the sound of thunder. The storm had returned, stronger this time. Wind rattled the windows, rain slashed against the glass. She sat up, heart quickening, the instinctive fear of someone who'd lived too long surrounded by glass towers and fragile certainties. Then she heard footsteps. Dominic appeared in the doorway, barefoot, shirt sleeves rolled, calm as ever. You're awake, he said. I don't sleep through storms. He crossed to the window, glancing out. They'll pass. You always say that. I'm usually right. She smiled faintly despite herself. You don't get points for being predictable. He looked back at her, something softer in his expression. Then what do I get? Credit for showing up. He nodded once. That's fair. He sat on the edge of the armchair across from her, elbows on his knees, eyes reflecting the flicker of lightning outside. The silence stretched between them, not awkward, not tense, just alive. Finally, he said, You asked me once if I regret it. The answer's still no. But I'm starting to understand why people do. Why? Because success is simple until you realize what it cost. And what did it cost you? He met her gaze. Everything I didn't know how to name. The honesty cut through the noise of the storm. Isla swallowed. You're naming it now. He gave a slow nod. I'm trying. Outside, thunder rolled again, low and distant. She shifted closer on the couch, curling her legs under her, and he watched her the way he'd watched her sleep that first night, with a kind of quiet awe he didn't know how to disguise. You're going to stare all night? She asked, voice teasing. Probably. She laughed softly, shaking her head. That's unsettling. Good, he said. Maybe you'll finally understand what it feels like when someone sees you and doesn't look away. Her laughter faded. That's not what scares me. Then what does? She met his eyes. What happens when you do look away? He leaned forward slightly, his voice a low promise. I won't. For a long time, neither spoke. The storm outside began to fade, the rain softening against the windows. The tension in her shoulders eased. She leaned back, eyes half closed, and whispered, You don't have to keep watch, Dominic. He smiled faintly. I know, but I will anyway. She fell asleep not long after, her breathing steady, her hand resting over the small curve that wasn't quite visible yet. He stayed there long after the fire burned low, watching the shadows shift across her face, memorizing the quiet proof that the war he'd fought all his life, against loss, against vulnerability, against need, was over. Because the war was never out there. It had always been inside him, and she'd won it without even trying.
The morning after the storm, the world was too still. No thunder, no wind, only the quiet hum of the lake against the shore, the faint scent of damp pine drifting through the windows. For the first time in months, Isla woke without an alarm or the distant vibration of her phone demanding decisions. The silence should have been comforting. Instead, it felt heavy, like the pause between questions she wasn't ready to answer. Dominic wasn't in the room. He never was when she woke. It was a habit of his, giving her space he never said aloud, as though he knew too much proximity too soon would drive her back into flight. But every absence left its own ache. She rose, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and padded barefoot to the window. The lake glimmered pale and endless beneath a slate sky. Mist clung to the surface, blurring the horizon. The reflection of the trees moved like ghosts on the water. Somewhere below, she could hear him moving. Quiet footsteps, the soft sound of a door closing, then opening again. The house felt alive now, less like a retreat and more like something waiting. When she found him, he was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, coffee already brewing. He looked like he belonged in another life, one where mornings started gently and nothing had to be defended. He glanced up as she entered. "You're awake." "So are you," she said, voice still rough with sleep. "I've been up for hours." "Do you ever rest?" "I'm trying," he said simply. She smiled faintly. "You say that like it's something you can learn from a manual. If there were one, I'd have read it by now." "Of course you would." The moment softened, he poured a cup and handed it to her. Their fingers brushed, and she felt the quiet electricity she pretended not to notice anymore. "How's the lake?" he asked. "Beautiful. Too calm." "Too calm?" she nodded, staring out the window. "It makes me nervous. I don't trust still things." He studied her, recognizing the truth beneath the words. Then, "Maybe that's what you're here to learn." She sipped the coffee, eyes still on the mist outside. "Safety feels like a trick, Dominic, like the silence before something bad happens." He didn't argue. He rarely did when she spoke like that. Instead, he said, "Then we'll give it time to prove itself." She looked at him over the rim of her cup. "You think time fixes everything?" "No," he said, "but it reveals what's worth keeping." By midday, she found herself helping him sort through stacks of old paperwork in the study, a room lined with books that smelled of dust and age. It was oddly domestic, almost normal. He worked methodically, silent, except for the occasional low hum of approval when she found the document he needed. Halfway through the third stack, she asked, "When did you last live here?" He didn't look up. "Before the company outgrew the city. Before I did." "You outgrew peace?" He smiled without humor. "I outgrew pretending I deserved it," she frowned. "And now? I'm trying to remember how it feels to earn something without fighting for it." Isla leaned back, watching him. The lamplight caught in his hair, outlining the sharp line of his jaw. For a man who'd built a kingdom on strategy, he looked strangely lost. "Dominic," she said quietly. He glanced up. "What happens if this," she gestured around the room, the house, the fragile stillness between them, "doesn't last?" He didn't hesitate. "Then we start again." She shook her head. "You make everything sound so easy." "It's not easy," he said. "It's choice. Every morning we wake up and decide whether to keep building or start breaking again." "And which do you think we're doing?" He paused. "Both." The answer unsettled her more than comfort could have. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. She stood on the balcony long after the lights were off, the cold air biting at her bare feet, the lake whispering below. Safety, choice. Both were new languages she didn't know how to speak. She'd spent so long surviving, keeping her voice measured, her body still, her emotions tucked behind professionalism, that peace felt like a foreign country. And yet here she was, learning its dialect in the way he looked at her, the way he didn't demand, the way silence with him no longer felt like punishment. But the fear remained, small, stubborn, sharp, because people like Dominic Hart didn't change easily. And if he did, it would only be because of her. That thought scared her most of all. The next morning she woke before the sun, the house still heavy with sleep. A faint fog pressed against the windows. The world outside looked soft, unfinished. Dominic was already downstairs. Of course he was. She heard the faint echo of his voice through the open doors of the study. It wasn't sharp like the tone he used in meetings, but low and measured. She hesitated at the edge of the stairs, listening. "Yes," he said quietly into the phone. "Postpone it a week. I don't care about optics. No, do it quietly. The board doesn't need to know until after the numbers settle." A pause. "Because I said so, that's why." His voice hardened just enough to remind her of who he was outside this house, the man who ruled entire markets with a few syllables. The man the press called untouchable. When the call ended, silence filled the hall again. She walked in before she could change her mind. "Business never sleeps, does it?" she said lightly. He looked up, expression softening instantly. "It was just a call. You said that like it makes it less consuming." He closed the file and set his phone face down on the table. "It's just noise, Isla. The world will still be there when we're ready to face it." She leaned against the doorframe. "You sound almost like you believe that." "I'm trying to," he said, and there was that word again, the one he kept using, the one that made him sound human. Trying. They spent the afternoon in quiet rhythm. She worked on a proposal for Brightline while he moved between calls and files. Occasionally, he'd glance up as if to check she was still there, still real. Around 3, the power flickered. Once, twice, then went out completely. The silence deepened. Outside, clouds had gathered again, darker this time. Dominic walked to the window. "Transformers down. You said you liked storms. I said I respect them." The wind rose, bending the trees near the lake. She watched him close the shutters, his movements efficient, practiced. "You've done this before," she said. He nodded. "Once. Years ago. The power went out for 2 days. I didn't mind." "Why not?" "It forced me to stop." She smiled faintly. "You? Stop?" "Briefly. When the rain started, it came hard, sheets of silver slashing across the glass. The house darkened. Without power, the quiet was absolute." She lit candles while he moved to the fireplace, striking a match. The first flare of light reflected in his eyes, amber and alive. When the flames caught, the warmth filled the space almost immediately. "You've done this before, too," he said, watching her. "I used to when I couldn't sleep," she said. It made the dark feel less like a threat. He turned toward her. "Does it still feel like one?" "Sometimes," she admitted. "Silence can be loud." He nodded slowly. "Then let's fill it." He picked up a book from the side table and sat on the floor beside the fire, motioning for her to join him. She hesitated, then did. The heat from the flames brushed her skin, painting everything in shades of gold and shadow. "What are you reading?" she asked. He looked at the cover. Letters from a man who lost everything and learned to start again. "That sounds heavy." "It is, but it's honest." She rested her chin on her knees. "Do you ever wonder if honesty is overrated?" "Constantly." He read a passage aloud, his voice steady. "We are shaped not by what we conquer, but by what we choose to protect." When he finished, neither spoke for a long moment. "That's not about power," she said, softly. "No," he said, "it's about love." Her pulse jumped. "You believe that?" He didn't answer right away. "I believe that power without love destroys itself, and love without power gets crushed by the world." She studied him in the firelight, the set of his jaw, the faint shadow under his eyes, the way vulnerability lived in his stillness now instead of hiding behind it. "Dominic," she said quietly, "are you afraid of me?" He met her gaze. "Every day." The honesty struck her harder than any declaration could have. "Then why keep me here?" she whispered. "Because you're the only person whose truth I want near me when everything else falls apart." The words settled between them, soft and dangerous. She leaned back against the couch, watching the flames twist and curl. Her hand rested on her stomach, the small swell that felt more real now with each passing week. For the first time, the fear that had haunted her began to change shape. It wasn't the fear of him, or of the world, or of what they'd done. It was the fear of wanting this quiet, this warmth, this impossible peace, and knowing how easily it could break. Dominic must have sensed the thought because he said quietly, "Safety isn't the absence of fear, Isla. It's learning what's worth being afraid of." She looked at him, eyes shimmering in the firelight. "And what's worth it to you?" He didn't hesitate. "You. Always you." Her throat closed around the sound of his name. For a long moment neither of them moved. Then she reached for his hand, slow and uncertain, and he met her halfway. Their fingers intertwined, steady, deliberate, no promises, no control, just truth. The storm eased by morning. When the power came back, the clocks blinked back to life, and the house seemed almost reluctant to return to its usual hum. Isla stood by the window, watching sunlight cut through the mist. Dominic came up behind her, silent, his reflection aligning with hers in the glass. "You didn't sleep," she said. "Neither did you. Maybe I'm learning from you." He smiled faintly. "Then I should warn you, it's not a good habit." She turned slightly, meeting his eyes. "You should know something." He waited. "I don't feel like I'm running anymore," she said softly. "And that terrifies me." He nodded once. Good. That means you've stopped surviving and started living. She exhaled a sound somewhere between laughter and surrender. And if living breaks us, he touched her hand, then we build again, together. The lake outside gleamed silver, the air clean after the storm. For the first time, the stillness didn't feel like a trap. It felt like a beginning.
It had been 3 weeks since the lake house had become something more than an escape. 3 weeks since the rhythm of his life had changed from calendar alerts and acquisition calls to the steady, unpredictable pattern of Isla Ward breathing beside him. And for the first time in his life, Dominic Hart wasn't sure whether he'd built a sanctuary or a cage. The house was quiet that morning, sunlight moving slow and golden through the tall windows. He'd been up before dawn, answering messages, the old reflexes creeping back in. The need to control, to calculate, to prepare for the next blow even when there wasn't one. Old instincts didn't die, they just waited. He closed the laptop when he heard her coming down the stairs. Bare feet, slow steps. She still walked like someone testing the edges of new safety. "Morning," she said softly. He looked up. She wore one of his shirts, pale blue, too large, the sleeves rolled. He didn't know if she understood what that did to him. "Morning," he replied. "Did you sleep?" For once. She smiled faintly. "You. I tried. You always say that. Because it's always true." She leaned against the kitchen counter, watching him the way she used to in meetings, calm, assessing, aware of every microshift in his face. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," he said. She tilted her head. "Try again." He sighed. "Work. You mean the world you left 3 weeks ago?" "I didn't leave it," he said quietly. "I just gave it a different address." Her eyes softened. "And is it knocking at your door again?" It never stopped. She walked closer. "Then open it, Dominic. Or close it. But stop standing in between." He looked at her, really looked, and realized she wasn't talking about the company. Later, he went out to the edge of the lake, phone in hand, the screen glowing with unread messages. The city was waiting, relentless as ever. Investors wanted updates. The board wanted confirmation. His CFO wanted a decision about a merger that could shift $1 billion overnight. Once, those numbers had meant everything. Now they felt like echoes from a world that no longer fit him. He typed a single message. "Delay the meeting. Indefinitely." Then he powered off the phone and slid it into his pocket. When he looked up, Isla was standing on the dock, hair catching the sunlight, watching the water ripple around her feet. He walked to her without a sound. She didn't turn. "You're not used to silence, are you?" "Not this kind." "Which kind?" "The kind that feels like peace instead of punishment." She glanced at him, a small smile curving her lips. "You talk like a man discovering language for the first time." "Maybe I am." He joined her at the edge of the dock, both of them staring out across the endless stretch of gray-blue. The air smelled of pine and rain. "I used to come here when I needed clarity," he said quietly. "And did you find it?" "No. Just distance. I thought space would make things clearer. It only made me lonelier." She turned her head toward him. "And now? Now I understand clarity isn't about distance. It's about who stands beside you when you stop running from yourself." The words slipped out before he could filter them. For once, he didn't try to pull them back. She said nothing. The wind lifted strands of her hair, and without thinking, he reached out to tuck them behind her ear. The simple touch unmade something in him. That evening, he found her in the study, surrounded by papers and an open laptop. The soft glow of the desk lamp made her skin look like porcelain, her concentration absolute. He watched her for a moment before speaking. "You've been working for hours." "I know," she said. "You promised to rest." "I'm editing Brightline's next statement. It's not rest, but it's close. Let someone else handle it." She smiled faintly. "You forget, I am someone else now." He stepped closer, resting one hand on the edge of the desk. "You can delegate." "I can't," she said. "It has to sound right. If we're going to tell the truth this time, it needs to come from me." "Truth about what?" She looked up at him. "About us." He froze. "Us." Her voice was steady. "The world already speculates, Dominic. You can't buy silence forever. Maybe it's time we stop hiding." He studied her face. "You think exposure is freedom?" "I think secrecy is a slow kind of death," she said. "And I'm tired of dying quietly." The simplicity of it broke him open. She wasn't asking for spectacle. She was asking for light. He sat across from her, the firelight flickering between them. "If we do this, there's no going back. Every camera, every investor, every rival. I know. They'll question everything. Let them, she said softly. I'm done living behind walls of glass. Her words echoed in him long after she'd gone to bed. Near midnight, Dominic stood in the piano room, the one she'd opened weeks ago, staring at the framed photograph of his mother. He hadn't looked at it in years. You were right, he murmured. Into the silence. Silence can be dangerous. He sat at the piano, fingers tracing the keys. The melody that came was quiet, incomplete, full of spaces that felt like memory. He played until the weight in his chest softened enough to breathe again. When he stopped, Isla stood in the doorway. You should have woken me, she said. I didn't want to. She crossed the room slowly. You're playing again. I'm remembering, he corrected. Same thing. She leaned against the piano, her hand brushing his shoulder. What are you thinking? He hesitated. That I've spent my life building walls to keep the world out, and I finally let someone see through them. Her voice softened. And what did you see? He looked up at her. Everything I didn't know I needed. The air between them held a fragile, beautiful stillness. The fire burned low behind her, painting her in gold and shadow. She whispered, You can't protect me from what's coming. I know. Then why aren't you afraid? I am, he said. But fear means I finally have something worth losing. She brushed her thumb along his jaw, a touch both grounding and unguarded. Then hold it carefully, Dominic. Don't turn love into another empire. He caught her hand, kissed her knuckles once. No empires, he said quietly. Not this time. The next morning, he made one final call. Release the statement, he told his communications director. All of it. No denials. No PR spin. There was a long pause on the other end. Sir, are you sure? The markets will recover, he said. Tell them the truth. Miss Ward and I are expecting a child. She's resigning from her current position to lead Brightline independently. Effective immediately. Understood. He ended the call and looked out the window. The lake was silver and still again, the reflection of the house perfect on its surface. For the first time in years, he felt no need to prepare for fallout. He turned to find Isla standing behind him, barefoot, watching. You did it, she said. He nodded. We did. And you're not worried? He smiled faintly. Worried? Always. But not afraid. She stepped closer, resting a hand on his chest. Then maybe you're finally learning how to live. He covered her hand with his, heartbeat steady beneath their palms. No, he said softly. I'm learning how to be seen.
The morning the world found out, the lake was impossibly still. Not a ripple, not a sound, just the low hum of wind through the trees and the faint weight of something changing beneath the quiet. Isla stood at the window of the study, phone in hand scrolling through the headlines. Dominic Hart confirms relationship with former PR director Isla Ward and their expected child. Hart Industries stock falls 3 points, recovers in under an hour. The man who never lies finally tells the truth. Her heart hammered as she read. The pictures, all of them, had been taken years before. Gala photographs, old interviews, a single grainy image of her at his side. They were dissecting every detail of her body language, every half-smile, every unguarded glance she'd ever given him. She set the phone down, the screen still glowing. For years she had lived in the shadows of stories, crafting them, controlling them, rewriting them before they could hurt. Now she was the story, and she couldn't rewrite this one. She found Dominic on the terrace, sleeves rolled, leaning against the railing like he'd been standing there for hours. You've seen it, he asked without turning. I've seen all of it. He nodded. Then you know. I know, she said, that I don't know what happens next. He turned then, meeting her gaze. That makes 2 of us. She searched his face, not for fear, but for the flicker of calculation that had always lived there. She didn't see it. Just calm, resolve. Something steadier than the man she'd once known. You planned this, she said. I released the truth. Dominic. I didn't plan the reaction. She gave a short laugh. You always plan the reaction. Not this time, he said quietly. Something in his tone stopped her. It wasn't pride or control. It was peace. He'd done what she never thought possible. He'd stopped trying to predict the outcome. What do they want from me, she asked. The press, the board, the world. They want a confession, he said, simply. And they'll get one. She frowned. From you? No, he said. From us. Later that morning, Brightline's offices went live for a press conference. Ayla hadn't planned to be there. She'd thought she'd stay hidden, let Dominic handle the fallout, but when the car came, she didn't fight it. The drive into the city was long, familiar, haunting. The skyline rose like memory. The closer they got, the louder the noise became. The noise of the life she'd once ruled through silence. She saw the crowd before they stopped. Cameras, flashes, dozens of voices shouting her name. It didn't feel real. Inside, the room was flooded with light. The podium gleamed, the air smelled of nerves and expectation. Dominic was already there, waiting. The same black suit, the same steady posture, but softer now, as if the edges had learned how to bend. He turned as she entered. For a second, the room fell away. There was only him. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "Yes," she said. "I do." He nodded once, then together. They stepped onto the stage. The flash of cameras hit like a storm. Isla kept her head high, the way she'd taught 100 others to do in crisis, but her fingers trembled against the edge of the podium. Dominic stood beside her, silent, solid, the calm in the chaos. She cleared her throat, eyes scanning the rows of reporters. "I used to believe," she began, voice low but clear, "that stories were only safe when you controlled them. I spent my career building narratives that protected power, that justified silence, that turned people into strategies." She paused, letting the quiet settle. "I thought I could do the same with my life, that if I stayed behind the glass, if I denied, deflected, disappeared, the truth couldn't touch me." Her gaze flicked to Dominic. His expression didn't move, but his eyes did, the smallest nod, the kind that told her to keep going. "But the truth," she said softly, "doesn't need permission. It waits, it grows, it finds you." The crowd was silent. The cameras still flashed, but the noise was gone. "I won't apologize for loving him," she said, "and I won't apologize for leaving when I thought love meant losing myself. What I will say is this: power built on silence isn't strength, it's fear, and I'm done being afraid." The words left her body like exhale, heavy and freeing all at once. Beside her, Dominic's hand brushed against hers, a single subtle touch, a signal that the Empire was listening. And it didn't matter anymore. For a moment, no one breathed. The air inside the room seemed to suspend itself, between flash, between heartbeat, between one life and the next. Then the sound began. Not chaos. Applause, a slow, hesitant ripple that grew until it filled the entire space. Isla's throat tightened. She hadn't expected applause. She'd expected the sting of questions, the blade of headlines sharpening in real time. Instead, for the first time in her career, she felt seen. Dominic turned slightly toward her, his profile lit by the stage lights. "You did that," he murmured. She shook her head. "No, we did." He looked at her then, not as the man who owned empires, not as the strategist who turned markets into obedience, but as the one who'd finally stopped running from himself. It wasn't victory, it was surrender, and it was enough. The next hours blurred into interviews, statements, calls. Outside, the city churned, the narrative shifting faster than she could track. The press had what they wanted, a story that defied the script they'd written for him. Dominic Hart, the untouchable CEO who had dared to tell the truth. Isla Ward, the woman who refused to let him hide behind it. By evening, they were on the balcony of Brightline's top floor. The city stretched beneath them, alive with light and motion. She leaned on the railing, exhaustion written in every line of her body. "It feels strange," she said, "being the story. It won't last," he said, "it never does, but it'll echo." "Yes," he said softly, "it always does." She looked at him. "You're not angry? For what? For losing control." He smiled faintly. "I didn't lose it. I gave it up." She exhaled, laughing quietly. "You make that sound easy. It's not." He moved closer, the distance between them narrowing until his reflection merged with hers in the glass wall. "You realize what you did today?" he said. "Spoke? Changed the ending." She tilted her head, eyes searching his. "And what do you think the ending is?" "This," he said, reaching for her hand. "Whatever comes after fear." The drive back to the lake was silent except for the hum of the tires on wet asphalt. The world outside had turned silver again, washed clean by the day's rain. Halfway there, she glanced at him. His face was calm, illuminated by the dashboard glow. "You think we'll survive this?" she asked. He didn't look at her, but his voice was steady. "We already did." "You sound so sure." "I am," he said, "because for the first time I'm not trying to protect a company. I'm trying to protect you, and that's the one thing I know how to do." She smiled faintly. "You still don't understand, do you? You don't have to protect me anymore." He looked over then, the smallest curve of a smile breaking through. "You think I'm capable of stopping? Maybe not," she said, "but maybe that's what love looks like for you. Not control, commitment." He reached for her hand, resting it against his leg. His thumb brushed slow circles against her skin, grounding, unspoken. "Then it's yours," he said quietly. When they reached the house, night had fallen. The power flickered once as they walked inside, the lake beyond the windows reflecting the faint shimmer of lightning far away. Isla dropped her bag on the chair, turned toward him. "We did it. We did. It doesn't feel real yet. It will." She moved closer. "What now?" He thought for a moment. "Now we stop hiding." "That sounds like a promise." "It is," she smiled softly. "You've made a lot of promises, Dominic, and I've kept the ones that matter." Her breath caught. She looked up at him, at the man who had once built an empire of glass and filled it with silence, now standing before her in the wreckage of everything he'd pretended to be. "Say it," she whispered. He frowned slightly. "Say what?" "My name." He stepped closer, his hand rising to her cheek, thumb brushing along her jaw. His voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "Isla?" The way he said it, soft, certain, stripped of all pretense, felt like forgiveness. And in that moment, she realized something she hadn't dared to admit before. She didn't fear his power anymore. She feared what it would mean if he ever stopped choosing her. Later, she stood alone by the lake, moonlight trembling across the surface. The air was cool and sharp, full of promise. The future was uncertain. Yes, the world would keep talking, twisting, dissecting. But the noise didn't matter anymore, because for the first time in her life, the story was hers. Dominic stepped up behind her, his reflection joining hers in the dark water. "You're thinking again," he said, "always." "Dangerous habit." "Maybe," she said, "but not fatal anymore." He smiled faintly. "Then you're learning." She turned to face him. "We both are." The wind picked up, rippling the lake, scattering the reflection of the house into silver fragments. He reached out, steadying her against the breeze, his palm warm against her back. "You said once that safety felt like a trick," he murmured. "Does it still?" She shook her head. "No, not here." "Good." The silence that followed was full of everything they'd fought for, everything they'd lost, everything still waiting to be built. When he finally spoke again, his voice was quiet. "You know what the press will call this, don't you?" She smiled. "A scandal. Or a miracle. Maybe both." He reached down, intertwining their fingers, their reflections stretching out across the water. "Then let them decide." The lake swallowed the sound of the world. The air smelled like rain and beginning. And for the first time, Isla didn't feel like she was standing inside someone else's empire. She felt like she'd built her own. The night it happened, the lake was asleep. No wind, no moon, just the steady rhythm of rain against the windows, a soft percussion that filled the house like a heartbeat. Isla felt it before she knew it, a shift, a tightening, the quiet certainty that something irreversible had begun. "Dominic," she whispered into the darkness. He was awake before she finished his name. He always was. He sat up, eyes sharp, the calm of a man built for crisis, but when he looked at her, when he saw the truth flicker across her face, something inside him broke open. The CEO was gone. The man remained. "It's time," she said softly. He was on his feet in an instant, but his voice stayed steady. "Okay," he murmured. "Okay, Isla, we're ready." And for the first time, she believed him. The drive to the hospital was a blur of rain and light. The wipers moved in rhythm with her breath, each sweep marking another heartbeat closer to everything they'd waited for. Dominic held her hand the entire time. Not gripping, not leading, just holding. When they arrived, the nurses met them at the entrance, quiet, efficient. The world narrowed to white walls and soft voices, to the press of her palm in his, to the rhythm of the rain still echoing outside. He stayed beside her through everything, silent, grounded, unflinching. Every time she faltered, his hand found hers. Every time fear threatened to rise, his voice cut through the noise. "You're not alone," he said. "Not ever again." And somehow those words carried her further than strength ever could. Hours blurred into something timeless. The rain slowed. The first pale light of dawn began to crawl through the blinds. And then, just like that, the world changed. A sound, small, piercing, alive, filled the room. Her breath caught. Dominic froze. The nurse smiled. "It's a boy." Isla closed her eyes, tears slipping free. Not from pain, from awe, from the sudden, dizzying realization that love could take shape. Real, breathing, perfect. When they placed the baby in her arms, she didn't speak. She didn't have to. He was small, impossibly so, dark hair, eyes that opened once then closed again, safe in the curve of her chest. Dominic sat beside her, staring like he'd just seen something divine. His hand trembled when he reached out to touch the baby's tiny fist. "Hey," he whispered. "I'm your father." The words sounded foreign on his tongue, fragile, reverent. The baby's fingers curled around one of his. And in that single motion, everything Dominic had ever been, every battle, every deal, every wall he'd built, fell away. Isla leaned her head against his shoulder, her voice barely audible. "You can stop fighting now." He nodded once, eyes fixed on the life they'd made. "I already have." Outside, the rain finally stopped. By the time they brought the baby home, the lake had turned to glass, sunlight spilling across the surface in long golden bands, and the house smelled of cedar and warmth. Dominic stood by the window, their son asleep in his arms. The baby's small breaths rose and fell against his chest, perfectly steady. "You know he looks like you," Isla said softly from the couch. He smiled. "Then he'll be impossible." She laughed quietly. "And strong." He turned toward her. "And loved. Always," she said. He crossed the room, sitting beside her, the baby still nestled between them. For a long time they said nothing, because words couldn't touch the gravity of this new, quiet joy. The man who had once commanded the world now sat still, undone by a pair of tiny hands. And the woman who had once lied to save him now told the truth without saying a word. That evening, when the baby slept in his cradle for the first time, Isla stood on the balcony. The lake glowed beneath the setting sun, gold fading into rose. Dominic came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "He's perfect," he murmured. "He's ours," she said. They stood there as the light dimmed, two people who had spent a lifetime learning that power meant nothing without peace, that love wasn't about ownership, and that the truest kind of safety was found in surrender. Below them, the water rippled once, catching the last of the light before going still again. The empire they had built, not of steel or headlines, but of truth and forgiveness, breathed quietly around them. And in that stillness, Isla finally understood what Dominic had meant all along. Control was an illusion, but love was law.